Every Halloween, I like to get in the spirit by watching a classic, John Carpenter's Halloween. And with the recent release of Halloween Ends, the supposed conclusion to a franchise over 40 years in the making, I figured what better time than now to look back at all the Halloween movies. In this video, I'll recap and review every Halloween movie from the 1978 original through the most recent entry, Halloween Ends. Considering the simple premise of the first movie, a guy kills some babysitters and their boyfriends, it's fascinating to watch decades of attempts at keeping the story going. And as filmmakers attempted to keep things fresh, they took Michael Myers to some weird places. Telepathic connections, ancient runes, Celtic rituals, Stonehenge, internet reality shows, evil eyes, Busta Rhymes, and even fourth wall breaking commercials turning Michael into a fictional character in his own franchise. You might be wondering why I'm doing all this. After all, there are a lot of Halloween movies, and they're not all great. Well, the truth is, I'm not just doing this for fun. There's another, more personal reason I'm doing all this, a matter of life and death. Something I'll reveal after we get through the first movie, so make sure you stick around. And as we stare into the blank, pale, emotionless face of evil, maybe we'll all learn a little something about ourselves. Let's start with the original 1978 Halloween, and I'll see you on the other side. It's Halloween night, 1963, in Haddonfield, Illinois. 6-year-old Michael Myers grabs a kitchen knife, puts on a clown mask, and inexplicably murders his older sister, Judith. October 30th, 1978. Marion Chambers accompanies Dr. Samuel Loomis to Smith's Grove Sanitarium to escort Michael Myers for a court hearing. But when they arrive, they find patients wandering freely. While Loomis checks the gate, Michael attacks Marion and steals their car. The next day, Halloween, Laurie Strode drops off a key at the abandoned Myers house. Her father is a realtor, trying to sell the place. Though neither are aware, Michael is in town and has already taken up residence in his childhood home. He watches Laurie from inside and seems to take an interest. At Smith's Grove, Loomis tells hospital administrator Dr. Terrence Wynn that Michael is likely heading for Haddonfield. Wynn points out that it'd be a 150-mile trek and Michael can't drive. "He was doing very well last night," Loomis shouts. "Maybe someone around here gave him lessons." Loomis is frustrated that his pleas over the years for Michael to remain locked up have fallen on deaf ears. He heads toward Haddonfield himself. On the way, he finds an abandoned truck from an auto shop. Michael has killed the driver and stolen his coveralls. Once he arrives in town, Loomis visits the cemetery and finds that Judith Myers' grave was stolen. The groundskeeper blames misbehaving children, but Loomis knows the truth. He came home. Throughout the day, Laurie notices someone following her, though her close friends Annie and Linda don't notice. Instead, they focus on their plans for the night, boyfriends and drinking. Laurie, on the other hand, will be babysitting. Between that and studying, she's had little room for a social life, though she wishes she could go to the school dance tomorrow night with Ben Tramer. Meanwhile, Annie's father, Sheriff Lee Brackett, investigates a break-in at the hardware store. Halloween masks, rope, and a couple of knives were stolen. They don't know it yet, but that was the work of Michael Myers. Loomis finds the sheriff there and explains what's happening. As night falls, they investigate the Myers house. They find a dead dog, which recently served as a meal for Michael. And Loomis tells Brackett more about his patient. He met Michael 15 years ago. He was told there was nothing left. No reason, conscience, understanding of life and death, or right and wrong. The boy had a blank, pale, emotionless face, and the blackest eyes, the devil's eyes. He spent 8 years trying to reach him, and another 7 trying to keep him locked up, because he realized that what was living behind that boy's eyes was purely and simply evil. Meanwhile, Michael himself has selected his first victim, Annie Brackett. He watches the girl as she babysits Lindsay Wallace. Across the street, Laurie babysits Tommy Doyle, who catches a few glimpses of the boogeyman, though Laurie just misses it. Annie's time comes after she drops Lindsay off at the Doyles. Leaving the girl under Laurie's supervision, Annie plans on picking up her boyfriend and bringing him back. But she never makes it out of the garage. Michael strangles her in the car. His next victims are Linda and her boyfriend Bob. They arrive at the Wallaces, which Annie had offered as a private place for some adult fun. But Bob ends up pinned against the wall by Michael's knife, and Linda is strangled while on the phone with Laurie. Between the strange call and Annie still having not returned with her boyfriend, Laurie heads over to investigate the Wallaces' house. There, she discovers a macabre display, Judith Meyer's grave, Annie's body splayed before it, and soon Bob and Linda's bodies are revealed too. Finally, she comes face to face with her stalker. Laurie escapes the house and runs back to the Doyles' home, where Tommy lets her in. Michael soon joins her there too, but this time, Laurie fights back, and he ends up knocked out with a sewing needle in his neck. Laurie heads upstairs to join Tommy and Lindsay, but Michael isn't dead yet. He attacks again. This time, Laurie plunges a wire hanger into his eye, then stabs him with his own knife, and he's down for the count. She sends the kids outside, and their shouts attract Loomis's attention. He heads inside to find Michael once again on his feet, struggling with Laurie. She pulls off his mask, momentarily distracting him as Loomis puts 6 bullets in him. Michael falls off the balcony, but when Loomis checks for a body, he finds nothing. Laurie survived the night, but so too did evil. Overall, the story of Halloween is pretty straightforward. A killer shows up and murders people until only the main character escapes. So what's the big deal? Why has this movie had such a lasting legacy? Part of the answer is just craftsmanship. The rules of suspense aren't a mystery. Introduce a threat, get us to care about the characters, and make sure we know they are on a collision course. The longer you draw that out without making us bored, the more tension you get. There's no question Halloween follows that formula. Most of the movie's first hour is spent with Laurie, Annie, and Linda as the shape looms in the background. We know he's coming, and instinctually, we know he's coming at night. So as the sun creeps lower and kids start trick-or-treating, we feel danger approaching ever closer. Great writers know that surprise will scare you for a second, like jump scares, but anticipation can turn your stomach for as long as they can hold your attention. Think of the moments when Michael attacks. Annie heads into the garage. Will Michael get her here? Wait, she forgot her keys and went back in the house. Damn, if only she'd gotten in her car and left. Michael is probably waiting in the house. Now he'll get her for sure. Never mind, she got her keys and went back in the garage without incident. Once she's in the car, the anticipation reaches a fever pitch, because we see the fogged up windows. Only then does Michael finally attack. Admittedly, it's hard to watch the movie now and feel the same level of suspense you would have felt in 1978. Working against it are the countless imitations that followed. Though it's worth noting, Halloween wasn't by any means entirely original. It was itself inspired in part by Alfred Hitchcock, and specifically Psycho, which had been released 18 years earlier. In fact, the movie wears that inspiration on its sleeve by casting Jamie Lee Curtis, daughter of Janet Leigh, who starred as Marion Crane in Psycho, and Marion had a boyfriend in that movie named Samuel Loomis. So the connections between Halloween and Psycho are no secret. Although Psycho and Alfred Hitchcock in general are the inspiration for Carpenter's fundamental technique, it should be noted that Black Christmas was released 4 years before Halloween, and was also an inspiration in some more blatant ways. A mysterious killer stalking a group of young girls, taking them out one by one. It even opens on the killer's POV with heavy breathing, just like Halloween. But even if Halloween didn't invent the slasher genre, it certainly popularized it and kicked off the slasher craze, exposing us to the formula over and over. Eventually, you get diminishing returns, which unfortunately applies even to the original. Also, the standards for violence have changed drastically over the years. We're so used to blood and guts now that the kills in Halloween look tame and harder to take seriously. And of course, there's the fact that you know how things will go. Even if you haven't watched all the Halloween movies, surely you've seen the ads, and no Laurie has to survive at least this first movie. But even if some of the suspense is worn off, the movie still has more to offer. And I'd argue these other things are what make the movie special. These are what elevate it above just a suspense movie. First is the atmosphere. That's a really vague word people throw around a lot, but what I'm talking about is a mix of things that add up to a unique feeling. The largest factor is probably John Carpenter's original score. The opening credits introduce the main theme, and the second you hear it, that simple, ominous music immediately becomes synonymous with Halloween. I'd play it for you here, but I like when my videos don't get taken down. But the truth is, I don't need to play it because you know the Halloween theme. It's as iconic as Michael Myers himself. And the rest of the movie is scored similarly, using a synthesizer, giving it a consistent sound throughout. As a result, unlike most movies where you're aware there was a score, but don't have much to say about it, with Halloween, you remember the Halloween score. The cinematography is also unique. First, there's the choice to start in Michael's POV. A lot's been made of that choice. People will say it's voyeuristic by placing us in the shoes of the killer, causing us to identify with him rather than the victims. I think it's a lot simpler than that. First, doing the opening shot in a continuous take without any apparent cuts allows events to play out in real time. That draws out suspense as long as possible, watching danger approach the girl, and we know it's danger because the person was spying on her, then of course he grabs a knife. Also, remember that if you were watching this movie for the first time, you didn't know whose eyes you were watching through. The POV shot allows us to follow the killer while keeping his identity a mystery until the shocking reveal. It's a 6-year-old kid. Throughout the movie, even when we aren't in a POV shot, John Carpenter often uses tracking shots. This is more influence from Alfred Hitchcock, who would sometimes, rather than cutting, move the camera from one environment to another. Personally, that always gives me a sense of space that makes things feel all the more real, something that was similarly effective 2 years later in Kubrick's The Shining. And of course, the more real it feels, the more your brain is tricked into temporarily believing them, and the scarier it can be. Speaking of real, I also love the way Carpenter captured some aspects of suburbia in the fall. The quiet streets covered in colored leaves, or the void of darkness between houses at night, like beacons in a sea of danger. Finally, there's the threat itself. Michael Myers, or as he's actually credited, the Shape, he's a villain unlike any other. The opening of the movie begs the question, why? Why would a child suddenly become a monster? The movie makes us wonder until it gives an answer that isn't really an answer at all. Michael Myers is evil. This is certainly not the first time we've seen evil portrayed on film, but usually that evil is defined. Maybe it's a villain driven by greed, someone with an ends justifies the means philosophy, or aliens who need our resources. But Michael Myers isn't any of that. He's just evil. It's a strange idea, and one that gets you thinking. What exactly is evil? Is it something external that invaded Michael? Is it just random bad luck that he was born this way? And as Loomis would have you believe from his chilling monologue, does this evil mean he is not human, but just the shape of one? It's no secret that hiding the monster often makes it scarier, like in Ridley Scott's Alien, where the creature is hardly ever seen in full. Here, we often see Michael, but he carries the same sense of mystery and instills the same fear through the mysterious evil he carries, and the way he skirts the line of natural and supernatural. In this first movie, he survives attacks that conceivably someone could survive if they were really driven and really lucky. Though his biggest feat is getting up and walking away after taking 6 bullets from Loomis. The ending is chilling, not just because he escaped, but what he escaped. At that point, you can wonder, Does evil make Michael not less than human, but in some ways more than human? Can you ever really stop evil? And finally, there's the mask. What does evil look like? Co-writers John Carpenter and Deborah Hill knew any answer would be unsatisfying, so they covered it with a mask, a blank, pale face that looks almost human, but not quite, just like Michael himself. All of that adds up to a villain that is equal parts frightening and intriguing, which, by the way, is thanks in large part to the great Donald Pleasence. He portrays such a serious and dignified character who exudes intelligence and rationality, so when Dr. Loomis looks shaken and concerned, it tells you something is seriously wrong. I love all his delivery in this movie. Obviously, that includes his monologue to Brackett, describing his time with Michael, but even small moments like this one.
He came home.
You can hear the weariness and exhaustion in his voice, the knowledge that he knew this was coming when no one else did, but he hates that he was right. And we have to talk about Michael Myers' counterpart, Laurie Strode. Her job was to feel like a real person and make us care about her. Jamie Lee Curtis's performance is understated and natural, matching the tone of the movie, trying to craft a place that feels real so we care when it's invaded by evil. Her character is kind, we see the way she treats Tommy, and hardworking. We see that she's preoccupied with studying and babysitting, and we see that she has needs, other than to survive a horrific threat. She struggles with her social life, trying to balance all that hard work with anything else. I think that's an important aspect of horror that's often forgotten. Part of what connects us with characters is seeing that they need or want something. Hopefully, we want them to obtain that thing or make that change, so we prepare to take the journey with them. Then, in horror, that journey gets interrupted by the arrival of something awful. When the horror is just there and it's not interrupting anything, I think it's more challenging to have it land and to have us care. There are 12 more movies to get through, so I'll leave it there for now, but I'll definitely have more to say about Halloween as we go, because this movie will essentially be the standard I compare to for all the sequels. Now, I'll tell you why I'm really doing all this. It all started a little earlier tonight, right before I came down here. I was watching TV with my brother, Adam.
Have you ever noticed something a little off about Daniel?
I mean, he's been a little quiet lately, I guess.
Lately? It hasn't spoken a word since it was 6.
Yeah, that is weird. I should probably stop inviting him onto the podcast.
And it has that weird tattoo on its wrist. So, look at it. There's nothing left. No conscience, no reason, no understanding, and even the most rudimentary sense of life or death, or right or wrong.
Yeah, you're right. Jesus, it's disgusting. A blank, cold, emotionless face with the blackest of eyes. It's the devil's eyes.
Huh?
You know what's living behind that boy's eyes?
What?
Purely, simply evil. We gotta do something about this.
You're right. But how do you stop evil?
I don't know, but I know how to find out. This is exactly like the Michael Myers case. All we gotta do is rewatch and review all the Halloween movies, and we'll know exactly what to do.
What?
Keep an eye on Daniel. I'll be back in like 22 hours.
Wait, what? Wait, no. How's that going to help? Well, how's that going to do anything? Why is it that every time... Well, that's a good sign. Sure glad Gil's on top of it.
First, I'd need to acquire the movies. Unfortunately, the last Blockbuster in my town closed 12 years ago. But there's a guy I heard about who I was told could help. Hey, I heard you've got some tape. I'm looking for John Carpenter.
Carpenter? You a cop?
Nah, man, I'm cool.
All right. I got Thing, They live
Halloween.
Halloween. As in Myers? What's a guy like you want with Myers? Listen, I got Starman here. It's a classic. It'll take the edge off.
Halloween. John Carpenter, 1978. And I'll take the rest of them too if you got them.
The rest of them? You're not going to blow through all these in one sitting, are you?
I might.
I can tell by that look in your eyes. There's no change in your mind. You know, I've seen a few guys come through here with that same look. Usually, I never see them again. Neither does anyone else. You feel me?
Not really, no.
They're all there.
This is missing 2 tapes. Rob Zombie, the reboot and the sequel.
Whatever, man. Your funeral. $20 now, $20 for each additional day.
Okay. No problem.
Pleasure doing business with you. Hey, you know what? I'll throw that in for 20.
What is that?
This is a lament configuration. It opens up a portal to a hellish world. Agonizing pain and sadistic pleasures.
I'm good, thanks. You know what? I'll take it. Adam will probably want that. We already watched the first Halloween, so now let's go to the sequel, Halloween II. Halloween II opens right where the first left off. Loomis sees that Michael is not on the ground where he should have landed, so he quickly reconvenes with Sheriff Brackett to search him out. Loomis spots him among some trick-or-treaters and pulls his gun, only to watch the suspect die in a blaze as he's rammed between 2 cars. Did they kill Michael Myers? The examination of the burned body will be inconclusive, but Brackett and Loomis run into a couple of kids who say they can't find their friend. He left a party drunk, wearing some stupid mask, and never made it home. That friend? Ben Tramer, the target of Laurie's crush in the first movie. During all this, Michael, seemingly unfazed by 6 bullet wounds, gets back to work. He steals a butcher's knife from an old couple and uses it to slaughter an unsuspecting teen. Then he runs into a kid jamming to local news radio and overhears that Laurie was brought to Haddonfield Memorial Hospital, so that's where he goes. At the hospital, Laurie is watched over by an EMT named Jimmy, who develops a small crush on her. Michael, meanwhile, kills his way through the hospital staff. The security guard, Mr. Garrett, is killed by the claw end of a hammer to his skull. Bud, the rude ambulance driver who Nurse Karen is inexplicably attracted to, is strangled, leaving her alone in the therapy pool. After Michael turns up the temperature to unsafe levels, she's killed by a combination of drowning and severe facial burns. Nurse Janet searches for Dr. Mixter, only to find him unresponsive in a chair. When she spins him around, she finds him dead with a needle in the eye. Then Michael appears from the shadows and sticks a needle through her temple. One thing that's easy to forget watching the first Halloween is that Laurie has no idea who is trying to kill her. She never learns that the man in the mask is Michael Myers. In this movie, Jimmy finally breaks that news, and it seems to dislodge a repressed memory. As Laurie sleeps, she dreams of the past, her mother yelling that she's not her mother, Laurie visiting a 12-year-old Michael Myers. Marion Chambers returns to inform Loomis he's been ordered back to Smith's Grove, and a federal marshal has come to escort him. On the way, she reveals there was a sealed file on Michael Myers he was never given access to, a file that was just opened after the governor learned what happened. It reveals that Laurie is Michael's sister. She was born 2 years after Michael was committed. 4 years later, their parents died and she was adopted by the Strodes. Loomis realizes that after killing one sister 15 years ago, Michael must have returned to kill the other. He's after Lori. He forces the marshal to turn around at gunpoint and bring them to the hospital. Meanwhile, Lori gets an inkling that Michael is still out there and after her, so she escapes her room, leaving decoy pillows behind for Michael to stab uselessly. Jimmy goes looking for Lori, but only finds Nurse Alves, dead and strapped to an operating table. Michael has also stuck an IV in her arm, draining her of blood. Jimmy tries to run, but slips in the blood puddle. Finally, Michael kills Nurse Jill, the last of the staff between him and Lori, then chases her. She manages to escape and hide in Jimmy's car. He finds her there, only to pass out on the steering wheel. A deleted scene reveals that this is the result of a concussion, but he is still alive. Finally, Loomis and the marshal arrive. In the final battle, Loomis shoots Michael 5 times, seemingly incapacitating him. But the Shape gets back up to kill the marshal, stab Loomis, and corner Lori. Thankfully, Loomis gave her the marshal's gun, and she manages to shoot out both of Michael's eyes. The 2 bullets lodged in his brain do little more than blind him. Michael swings his knife wildly while Lori escapes, allowing Loomis to open up oxygen tanks and use a lighter to blow himself up, along with Michael. For a moment, Michael seems to survive. Then he collapses and burns. Outside, Lori is escorted away in an ambulance. It's worth pointing out up front that the only people who wanted to make this movie were the studio and the producers. John Carpenter, co-writer, director, and composer, along with his co-writer Deborah Hill, were both opposed to a sequel. Michael's disappearance and the feeling that evil can never truly be vanquished was the ending. But a sequel was going to happen with or without their involvement. Plus, because they were new to the industry, their contracts were structured in a way where, despite the first movie's success, they never really got their due. So they decided to at least write the sequel and get paid. Though Carpenter couldn't bring himself to direct essentially the same movie twice, and instead brought on newcomer Rick Rosenthal. The end result? Well, here's what Carpenter himself had to say about the movie just 3 years after its release.
On the other hand, I think Halloween II is an abomination and a horrible movie.
Okay, I don't know if I'd go so far as to call it an abomination. That's a pretty harsh word, which I might reserve for some of the other sequels. But the movie does have some major issues. First, though, I want to point out a few things the movie does well. Like the first movie, Halloween II once again nails the atmosphere. John Carpenter returned to score, though this time with help from another composer, Alan Howarth. And no matter how bad the story is, you cannot undo the work of that music. Visually, although the hospital scenes become tedious, this movie feels like the night after Halloween festivities. Everything is dark, the halls are empty, lifeless decorations are strewn about. When the hospital staff is just sitting around and Bud says he could go for pizza, it rings so true. Anytime I pull an all-nighter, I get to some point where I crave food, and it's never anything healthy. The movie also feels like a direct extension of the first one. It picks up literally where the first left off, and you cannot tell there was a 3-year break in filming. The transition is seamless. Also, one thing we don't get in the first movie is anyone mourning the victims. Halloween 2 is strangely lacking on that front when it comes to Lori, who doesn't mention, ask about, or seem to grieve the friends she lost just hours earlier. But there is a moment where Lee Brackett sees his dead daughter, Annie, and that moment hit hard.
I have to go and tell my wife before somebody else does.
The obvious choice would be for him to break down sobbing. The choice to have him immediately think of the task of informing his wife felt less obvious, but in retrospect, the right choice and an impactful one. Then he blames Loomis, and that too is a great story thread. Imagine how tortured Loomis must feel. He didn't kill Annie, Linda, or the others, but he did try and fail to keep Michael locked up. He feels the victim's blood on his hands, and that must partly explain why he was willing to die to stop Michael. Of course, that's undercut by our future knowledge that Loomis returns for 3 sequels, but you can't hold that against this movie. Don't worry though, there is plenty you can hold against this movie, and we'll get to that now. First, Laurie is hardly a character in this movie. She spends most of it drugged up and lethargic, or at times outright unconscious. And I already mentioned it, but it's really off-putting how she doesn't seem to grieve her friends at all, and how quickly she seems receptive to Jimmy's flirtations. It's mostly one-sided, but she wakes up smiling at him, and after everything she's been through, it just felt off. At least when it's not counterbalanced by any mention of Annie or Linda. I mentioned earlier how Laurie is part of what made the first movie work. She was a character with a problem. She was reserved and struggling to balance a social life with her schoolwork and responsibilities. And we can tell she wants to break out of that, not because she says, "I'm too reserved and need to break out of my shell," but because of moments like this one.
What are you going to wear to the dance tomorrow night? I didn't know you thought about things like that, Laurie.
She shows her vulnerability in a way that feels really genuine. She has a need which could be the impetus for its own movie, but that story comes to a screeching halt thanks to Michael Myers. The movie sets up a space that feels real and familiar, then it's invaded by horror. We feel the contrast from one to another. Halloween II fails to achieve that contrast, because it starts with Michael on the hunt, and with Laurie sidelined, we've lost her as the anchor character. That's not necessarily a problem in and of itself, but if you're going to take out Laurie, she has to be replaced with someone or something else. And this movie doesn't bother to do that. Instead, it introduces a bunch of characters we hardly get to know or care about and feeds them into the meat grinder. Like the worst slasher movies you've seen, the actors aren't playing characters. They're just objects to show off some creative kills, which was not the focus of the first movie, which was actually pretty light on blood and gore. It was much more about anticipation leading up to the kills rather than the kills themselves. But between Halloween 1 and 2, you had things like Friday the 13th. Audiences were already getting acclimated to more gore, and Carpenter felt like he had to keep pace. So Halloween 2 plants the spiky end of a hammer into someone's head, shows us a gruesomely burned corpse, a big blood puddle, and more. To be clear, the gore, which is admittedly still tame compared to today, is not a problem. The problem is that the movie seems to offer the bloodier kills in place of actual suspense. For the suspense to land, you still need defined characters with their own stories that connect us to them. And we don't get that here. The worst example is probably Alice, Michael's first victim. She was literally added after test audiences complained that Michael didn't kill any teenagers in the movie. Halloween 2 also starts to remove some of the mystery around Michael Myers by giving him a semblance of motivation. It turns out he and Laurie are secretly brother and sister. Carpenter always regretted that decision, and unfortunately, it would go on to define virtually every sequel until 2018, turning Michael from enigmatic killer to obsessed or possessed family killer. Does it ruin the character of Michael Myers? Personally, I don't take that as a given. Someone intent on murdering their sister is still scary, but in a very different way from the first movie, in a much more human way, which does make the movie feel a bit more typical and less special. But for me, worse than the twist itself is the execution. Loomis and the cops head to the school where there was a break-in. Inside, they find Michael has stabbed a knife into a crayon drawing of a family, specifically the sister, and he's written the word Samhain in blood. Loomis explains that it refers to the Celtic Lord of the Dead. First off, Loomis mispronounces the word as Samhain, and second, why does he even know that? It doesn't seem like ancient Celtic mythology would be in Loomis's wheelhouse, unless Michael had previously shown some interest in the subject, prompting Loomis to check it out. But if that were the case, you'd think Loomis would say something like, "Wait a minute, Samhain. I often caught Michael staring at Samhain books in the Smiths Grove Library." This action, even more than the sister connection, harms the Myers character for me. It just feels like a very human thing to do, the sort of thing you'd expect from a Batman villain, leaving cryptic clues behind at a crime scene. The last thing I'll mention is that this movie also starts to feel less and less real. The first had such a naturalistic style, which is undercut in Halloween 2 by some cartoonish moments. Like the way Michael finds out where Laurie is. A kid is listening to local news on a boombox, where it's announced Laurie is at Haddonfield Hospital, and wouldn't you know it, there's a sign just a few feet away with a big arrow pointing to Haddonfield Memorial. That is not a real-life moment. That's something that only happens in a movie script. Or when they get the wrong guy. It's almost laughable how easily the kid dies. The cars hit him, and immediately he erupts into flames. I don't think that's how it works, and it seems like it was only done so it would take time for them to truly identify whether it was Michael Myers or not, since all they had is a burnt corpse. Later, by sheer coincidence, some kids come up to Loomis and the cop to tell them they lost their friend. He was wearing a Halloween mask and probably wandering suspiciously because he was drunk. And it's a double coincidence because it ends up being Ben Tramer, the guy Laurie had a crush on in the first movie, who, in a triple coincidence, decided to wear the same mask as Michael Myers for Halloween. I don't hate the idea of Loomis's paranoia getting the wrong guy killed, but don't make it Ben Tramer. It feels more like a reference or Easter egg than an actual plot development. And Loomis himself. Donald Pleasance continues to do a great job, but the writing starts to fail him. At a certain point, his tendency to constantly monologue about evil starts to feel like self-parody. Like when he's in the car with Marion, she's trying to tell him something really important, that Laurie is Michael's sister, but she struggles to get his attention because he's too busy ranting about ancient druids and how Sam Hain is a metaphor for the darkness inside all of us. Anyway, it's an abomination and a horrible movie. Let's go to the next one.
Alright, Halloween 3. 99 minutes.
Jeez, I've got 18 hours of movie to go here. Hope everything's going okay up there.
Daniel!
It's October 23rd, and across the nation, children are singing to the tune of Silver Shamrock's new commercial.
4 days to Halloween, Halloween, Halloween.
The toy company advertises 3 new masks, a skull, a jack-o'-lantern, and a witch. But there is a sinister secret behind those masks, one that toy store owner Harry Grimbridge recently discovered. To keep a lid on it, mysterious men in suits are sent after him. He survives the encounter, but ends up in the hospital. Meanwhile, Dr. Daniel Chalice visits his ex-wife and 2 children. The kids show off their new Silver Shamrock masks before he heads to work. At the hospital, he finds Grimbridge ranting that they're going to kill us, all of us. And while left unattended, Grimbridge is killed by one of the men in suits, before that same man gets in a car and blows himself up. Chalice is disturbed by what happened in his hospital and hopes to get to the bottom of it. In the next few days, he meets Harry Grimbridge's daughter, Ellie, and joins her investigating her father's death. By his meeting calendar, they learn that Silver Shamrock Novelties was the last place he went before disappearing. So they head to Santa Mira, where the company is located. Immediately, they're under surveillance by cameras, dark figures, and the townsfolk. They grab a motel room for the night as loudspeakers announce it's time to clear the streets for curfew. But Dan sneaks out and bumps into a homeless man who tells him about Silver Shamrock's leader, Connell Cochran. He's up to something strange in that factory, but the man assures Dan he's going to grab some Molotov cocktails and burn the place down. After he and Dan part ways, the man's head is promptly removed by one of the men in suits. Back in the room, Dan and Ellie make love, while next door, Toy shop owner Marge Gutman inspects one of the silver shamrock masks. She notices a microchip on the back of the trademark. When she pokes at it, a laser fires, putting a crater in her face, and a spider crawls out of it. She's taken away by Cochran's doctors, while Dan and Ellie overhear one of his men say something about a misfire. The next morning, Dan calls his friend Teddy at the hospital to check on the investigation of the car explosion. Strangely, they didn't find any human parts, just plastic and metal. The next day, they head to the Silver Shamrock factory and take a tour, along with salesman Buddy Kupfer and his family. Though Connell Cochran makes it clear that one wing is off limits. Final processing. Ellie spots her father's car and raises her voice, drawing attention from the men in suits. She and Dan hastily leave, but that night the men kidnap Ellie. Hoping to rescue her, Dan sneaks into the factory where he comes face to face with one of the men, and quickly learns that they are not men at all. They're androids. Dan kills one, but is ultimately overpowered and captured by Cochran. The factory owner brings him into final processing, where he finds men with computers, and a stone stolen from Stonehenge. Cochran explains how they take pieces of it and embed them in microchips to harness its magic power. Then he shows a demonstration of that power. The Kupfer child wears a silver shamrock mask with the microchip. When a certain sequence is played on TV, his face is destroyed, and out of his mouth crawls bugs and snakes. That sequence will air nationally tonight at 9 p.m., Halloween night, condemning millions of children to the same fate. Why? To continue the tradition of Samhain, the Celtic festival usurped by Halloween, celebrated with bloody sacrifice. According to the planet's alignment, it's time for another. Meanwhile, at the hospital, as Teddy grows more suspicious of the remains from the car explosion, she's killed by one of the androids. Dan is restrained by Cochran but manages to escape. And thinking of his children wearing the cursed masks, he calls home and begs their mother to take them away. She doesn't listen. He frees Ellie, then takes out Cochran's army of androids by tossing and activating a box of the deadly microchips around them. Cochran himself seemingly turns to stone and vanishes. Dan leaves with Ellie, but learns she's been replaced by an android, forcing him to destroy her. The deadly commercial will air in minutes. Dan rushes to a gas station where he calls the TV network, begging them to pull the commercial. And they listen, for the first station and the second, but not the third. Dan screams for them to stop it over and over. Yet, the sequence plays. After Halloween II, Carpenter and Hill only agreed to come back on the condition they get to leave Michael Myers behind and try something new. The idea was to turn the franchise into an anthology series where each movie would focus on a different Halloween-themed story. Well, Halloween III underperformed and killed the anthology concept, but over the years, the movies gained a bit of a cult following. I think the reason why is that it's a bizarre movie and has a few memorable touchstones that, if you allow them to, will forever be associated with Halloween in your mind. As in the holiday, not Michael Myers. The first thing that comes to mind is the commercial which plays ominously throughout the film. Using the London Bridges theme, it's a catchy song. And at the same time, it's unsettling because it juxtaposes the childish tune against the fact that it portends something awful. Until the end of the movie, we don't know what it's counting down to exactly, but we know it isn't good. Making it an actual countdown was also a stroke of brilliance. Rather than hearing the exact same lyrics each time, the song changes slightly so it gives the days remaining to Halloween. The song becomes a creepy and weird ticking time bomb that Tom Selleck is racing against. The masks themselves are also more detailed than the normal kids' masks, so as a visual, they're unsettling on their own. And even more so thanks to the kids' methodical head bobbing in the commercial. It looks less like a dance and more like they're robots or hypnotized or something. Then there's the reveal of what the masks actually do. Once they're activated, they don't just kill the wearer. They blow up a cavern in their face, then bugs and snakes crawl out of it. One of the biggest challenges in horror is coming up with novel ways to frighten us or creep us out. Once we've seen something enough times, we become numb to it. So Halloween 3 came up with something new. It's terrifying, grotesque, and memorable. And finally, there's the overall weird concept at the center of this movie. What's Connell Cochran's big plan? He's stolen the bluestone from Stonehenge and chipped little pieces off it to embed in computer chips on every silver shamrock mask. Then, he's going to play a special Halloween commercial to activate them and give millions of kids throughout the country the bugs crawling out of your face treatment. Why? Because the planets are aligned, and it's time to revitalize the festival of the festival of Samhain with a blood sacrifice, the festival which eventually became Halloween. This reveal has two things going for it. One, its blend of science fiction and the supernatural makes it especially weird. It's a particular blend you don't often see in the mainstream. You see plenty of sci-fi movies and plenty of supernatural horror movies, but when you bring the two together, it pushes your movie to a bizarre place most people don't want to go. And it means your film is destined for cult status. Two, it's terrifying. There are plenty of movies with stakes as large as humanity's very survival, but Halloween 3 doesn't put all of humanity or all of America in the crosshairs. It specifically targets children. That makes the awfulness of Cochran's threat all the more palpable. When we get to the montage of children picking up Halloween masks and sealing their fate, it's impossible not to feel unsettled. And in the final scene of Chalice screaming into the phone for the commercials to stop, it's impossible not to feel your heart race. This is the moment where the bomb is about to go off, and if it does, it means millions of children dying in grotesque agony, probably right in front of their parents. These are the things which make Halloween 3 memorable. The same way that no one forgets Michael Myers' mask, Jason Voorhees' mask, or Freddy Krueger's claws, viewers of Halloween 3 never forget this.
4 days to Halloween, Halloween, Halloween.
So why wasn't Halloween 3 more of a success? Besides the obvious that audience wanted more of this guy? Well, the problem with Season of the Witch is that the stuff I just listed is only a small portion of the runtime, and the rest of the movie is kind of bland and tonally confused. Talking about the tone, the movie has moments that are hard not to laugh at. But the movie doesn't go far enough in the comedic direction for these moments to feel intentional. Instead, they come off as unintentionally cheesy. Take the robots, for example. They're strong enough to crush a man's skull with their bare hands, or rip a man's head off. But Chalice easily shoves his hand into their stomach and rips some wires out. They seemed impossibly strong before, so this moment feels like a joke. Or when Robot Ellie attacks Dan at the end. He crashes the car and gets away. But wait, she's still alive. Then he beheads her. But wait, her arm attacks. He gets rid of it, and then wait, her headless body attacks. She comes back so many times, it feels like parody. There's also the moment where Ellie says she wants to go to Santa Mira, and we immediately cut to Dan with some beers, calling his wife to say he can't pick up the kids. A character who began as someone honestly concerned with solving the murder at his hospital is now a guy shirking responsibilities as a father for a pretty girl. Laughing at these moments is part of what makes the movie fun, but they also feel out of step with the tone established at the start of the movie. So for many, I think it diminishes the experience. For others, it helps raise the film's cult status. For me, it gets at the core of the thing I want most from this movie. More. Like I said before, outside of its memorable touchstones, the movie is bland in a lot of ways, and the tone is a good example. It's not serious enough to be taken fully seriously, but it's also not funny enough to be entirely funny. So it's stuck in this weird in-between spot where I want more of either. Either embrace true horror and take the movie more seriously, or embrace the silliness and add more humor. The plot itself is also an issue. The movie starts with Ellie's father getting killed. Then she and Dan want to find out why. At the end, Dan finds the answer and learns of a sinister plot. Where Halloween 3 struggles is in figuring out what to do between the starting incident and the climax. And the entire middle act ends up feeling like the movie just treading water until the big reveal. We get a half-baked romance between Ellie and Dan, the deaths of two characters we don't know or care about, Ellie and Dan walking around, and a brief tour of Cochran's mask factory. There are moments when we should feel surprise or suspense, but the moments pretty much fall flat. For example, at one point, Ellie spots her father's car at the factory. This isn't exactly a surprise for us because we already knew they were behind it, but it should be a tense moment since Ellie brings attention to her and Dan, putting them in Cochran's crosshairs. The problem is that Ellie has not been developed as a character at all. We know nothing about her other than that she wants to know why her father was killed. She also feels like she was introduced purely to exist as a love interest and victim for Dan to fight for later in the movie. As for Dan, there was some attempt at character development, but it's pretty uneven. The scene I mentioned earlier where he basically trips over himself with excitement to cancel plans with his kids so he can go with Ellie to Santa Mira really undercut his character for me. At that point, I no longer saw him as a hero trying to get to the bottom of a murder, but as a father abandoning his kids for a romp with Ellie. Because our two main characters are under or oddly developed, putting them in danger doesn't do a whole lot to build suspense. The only victims I truly cared about were the countless children buying silver shamrock masks. And until the climax, that's not the immediate threat we're dealing with. So we needed some other compelling conflicts to keep the momentum going through the middle act. But Halloween 3 didn't find any. Instead, we basically spend the middle 40 minutes of the movie waiting for something to happen. Cochran's hideout at the end is a perfect metaphor for how I feel about this movie. He's a man obsessed with Halloween, or at least its predecessor, the Festival of Samhain. That's a great opportunity to do something visually fun and interesting. His secret hideout could have been filled with Halloween imagery, including bizarre art and artifacts. They also allude to Celtic witchcraft as the origins of the blood sacrifice he's committing. So at the center of his operation, they could have involved strange occult items. Instead, when we get behind the curtains, it's a big, empty warehouse with some boxes and computers. It was such a bland set for the movie's grand finale, and that's how the movie feels to me overall. Like the warehouse, it has a lot of potential, but ultimately, it's only filled with a few cool things. The masks, the gruesome death, and that weird, memorable jingle.
In 4 days to Halloween, Halloween, Halloween. In 4 days.
All right, 3 down, 12 to go. What do we got next? Halloween 4. The Return of Michael Myers. 10 years ago, he changed the face of Halloween. Tonight, he's back. Yeah, I'm thinking I'm back. All right, let's give it a whirl. Oh, hey, Daniel, how's it going?
Adam, we gotta get out of here, come on! Adam, what are you doing? Let's go! Oh! Hold on, Daniel's going crazy. He's gonna kill us.
We gotta review the Halloween movies, quick!
Well, I know, that's what I'm
Let's go,
doing
come
right
on!
now, but we gotta go. But hold on. You go ahead and get the car started. I gotta grab the tapes. We'll review them on the road.
Won't Daniel get you?
He walks really slow for some reason. I should be okay.
So where are we heading?
It doesn't matter. I just need you to circle the block for 1 hour and 48 minutes while I watch Halloween 4, The Return of Michael Myers.
Why are you messing with all those tapes anyway? Why don't you just pirate the movies?
You're kidding, right? Remember, the algorithm could be listening. All right, time for Halloween 4. It's October 30th, 1988, 10 years after the events of the first two movies. It turns out the explosion in Halloween 2 wasn't as lethal as it appeared. Michael lives, though he's been in a coma ever since. Loomis also survived, and Laurie has gone on to have a daughter named Jamie Lloyd. However, Lori and her husband were both recently killed in a car crash. Tonight, Myers is to be transferred from Ridgemont Federal Sanitarium back to Smith's Grove. But on the way, one of the doctors mentions Michael's one living relative, his niece Jamie. That wakes him up. He kills the doctors and heads for Haddonfield, where his new target awaits. Jamie is currently being raised by the Carruthers and is close with her foster sister, Rachel. Not only does she grieve her mother, but she's also plagued by nightmare visions of Michael Myers. On Halloween, after the babysitter cancels, Rachel's stuck looking after Jamie and has to cancel an important date with her boyfriend Brady. Meanwhile, Loomis hears about the transfer and knows it'll mean trouble. His suspicions are quickly confirmed when the overturned ambulance is discovered. Michael Myers has escaped. En route to Haddonfield, Myers kills an auto mechanic and steals his clothes, recreating his outfit from 1978. Loomis intercepts him there and pleads with his patient, offering himself as a sacrifice. Then he shoots at Michael, but misses. The killer takes off for Haddonfield, blowing up the gas station and leaving Loomis without a ride in the process. At school, Jamie is teased for being an orphan and for having the boogeyman as an uncle. Desiring some normalcy, she goes costume shopping with Rachel to prepare for trick-or-treating. Joining them is Rachel's friend, Lindsay Wallace, the same girl Annie and Lori babysat years earlier. At the store, Jamie picks out a clown costume, similar to the one worn by her uncle 25 years ago when he killed his sister. Moments later, she bumps into said uncle as he grabs the mask which completes his iconic outfit, though he quickly leaves unseen by anyone else. Meanwhile, Loomis hitchhikes his way to Haddonfield. He arrives just as the sun falls and Halloween night begins. His first stop is the police station, where he recruits the help of Sheriff Meeker, who has replaced the retired Lee Brackett. While trick-or-treating, Rachel and Jamie visit the sheriff's house, where they find Rachel's boyfriend Brady cheating on her with the sheriff's daughter, Kelly. He pleads his case as she storms off and quickly realizes she's lost sight of Jamie. At Haddonfield's power station, Michael kills the technician and causes a town-wide blackout. In the darkness of night, Rachel searches for Jamie and catches a glimpse of the shape, but she finds Jamie just as Loomis and Meeker arrive. Back at the station, they find the aftermath of a massacre. Michael has killed everyone there, leaving Meeker without a police force. Outside, they find a mob. Apparently, local bar owner Earl heard there was trouble in town and rounded up a militia. Meeker tries to calm them, but Loomis stokes their passions, urging them to hunt down Myers, though they only manage to misidentify and kill one of their friends. Meeker, Loomis, Rachel, and Jamie head to the sheriff's house, interrupting Brady and Kelly's night of passion. Deputy Logan arrives shortly after, unaware Michael is hiding in his back seat. They batten down the hatches and call for state police. Now, all they have to do is survive until the cavalry arrives. Before Michael shows himself, Loomis leaves to check out the Carruthers' place, and Meeker leaves to deal with Earl and the gang. The rest are unknowingly left alone with Michael. Logan is the first to die. It happens off-screen, but he seems to have been torn apart. Then Michael impales Kelly with a shotgun, and finally, he snaps Brady's neck. Though to his credit, Brady did defend Rachel and Jamie before dying. The two girls end up scuffling with Michael on the roof, leaving Rachel unconscious and Jamie running for help. She runs into Loomis, who brings her to the school for safety. Of course, Michael finds them there and incapacitates Loomis, but Rachel has woken up and rescues Jamie. Outside, they're picked up by Earl and leave town, just as state police arrive. Only problem is, Michael snuck into the pickup truck. He kills them all, leaving only Rachel and Jamie alive. Rachel takes over driving, shakes Michael off the truck, and crashes into him. While he's seemingly unconscious, Jamie walks over and touches her uncle's hand. He comes to life, but state police are here. They riddle Michael with bullets, knocking him into a mine shaft. At the Carruthers' home, Loomis is horrified to find that Jamie has taken after her uncle. Minutes after returning home, Jamie picked up a sharp pair of scissors and attacked her own mother, all while wearing a clown costume, just like her uncle Michael 25 years earlier.
What are you doing? It's just the ending to Halloween 4. Jamie, I think, killed her own mom or something.
I don't care about that. I think... Did we just hit someone?
What do you mean we? You're the one driving. But, yeah, I think you killed a fisherman or something.
A fisherman?
Yeah, he was holding a big hook. I don't know what he was doing. But that doesn't matter anyway. We gotta get back home so I can do this review.
Isn't Daniel there?
No, he left.
How do you know?
I can feel it.
You can feel it? What do you mean?
I have a telepathic link with Daniel that flares up every now and again. Wait a minute. It's happening right now.
Do you know why I summoned you here? To reveal your destiny. To tell you what you must do. I need you to return home and kill. Kill all of your brothers.
I was already doing that. 2 of them got away because you called me over here.
Quiet! You're not supposed to speak.
Are we, almost there?
Yeah, just a few more minutes.
All right, cool.
You know, I don't know. Sometimes I feel like I just don't get it.
Get what?
Everything. I just don't know. I have no understanding in even the most rudimentary sense of life or death, right or wrong.
No understanding in even the most rudimentary sense of life or death, or right or wrong.
No conscience, no understanding, and even the most rudimentary sense of life or death, right or wrong.
Totally get what you're saying. Let's see what's on the radio.
Police are searching the entire area for a mental patient who escaped last night from the Smiths Scrobourne County Sanitarium. He is now believed to be at large in Haddonfield.
So after Halloween 3, John Carpenter and Deborah Hill finally left the franchise, leaving it entirely in the hands of producer Mustafa Akkad, meaning he could finally do what he wanted without hearing any complaints. And what he wanted was more of the same, because the audience made it clear they were coming to theaters for Michael Myers. Under his purview, we got what would become known as the Thorn Trilogy, for reasons that will become clear by the time we get through Halloween 6. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. Halloween 4. I have mixed feelings about this one. It wasn't thought highly of upon release, but in retrospect, many have reappraised it more favorably. I've seen some call it the best slasher of the 80s. After rewatching it, I can't really say I agree. Or at least I think that statement says more about slasher movies of the 80s than it does about Halloween 4. This movie tried to course correct the franchise by cribbing from the first Halloween. It follows the same basic structure. Let us get to know a cast of characters while the shape looms in the background. When night falls, we find out who survives. The biggest compliment I'd give this movie is that it feels like a real movie with an actual structure. That doesn't feel like it should be a compliment until you watch some of the other sequels. And I think comparing it to the other sequels is another reason this one's been more favorably regarded over the years. Anyway, part of that basic structure is connecting with the characters, and this one does a reasonably okay job. Unlike Halloween 2, this one gets high marks for giving the characters wants and needs that help flesh them out. Jamie wants to feel like she's part of a real family, but at the same time feels guilty for burdening her older sister Rachel. Rachel, on the other hand, wants to help Jamie, but that does interfere with her social life. So in some sense, Jamie becomes a burden. It's good drama and helps elevate the characters. The problem is that it isn't handled with the same subtlety as the first Halloween, especially when it comes to Jamie. We never really get to know her at all, other than her issues. The first time we meet her, she asks Rachel if she loves her like a real sister. Then we see her stare longingly at a photo of her dead mother, Laurie Strode. Next, she has a nightmare vision of Michael Myers. Cut to breakfast, where she overhears that Rachel can't go out because she has to babysit her. So Jamie butts in with the comment, "I'm sorry I ruined everything. If I wasn't here, you could go out." Even when she's at school, we don't see what kind of student she is or what subjects she likes. We only see a bunch of students yelling, "Jamie's an orphan. Jamie's uncle is the boogeyman. Her mom can't even make her lunch because she's dead." You might say, who cares if it's not subtle? Well, I think we all know the feeling of forgetting you're watching a movie. You get so immersed, you stop thinking and just become a passenger in the story. But when you see the gears of the screenplay turning to make you feel something, it's hard to forget you're watching a movie and totally get immersed. I will say, I do like the Jamie character, mostly because I think Danielle Harris did a good job, and after watching 4 and 5 a few times, she just feels like an important part of Halloween history. I just wish she had a chance with a better story. Funny enough, the actress did return to the franchise as Annie Brackett in Rob Zombie's take, but we'll talk about that later. I do think some of the suspense in the movie works, especially some of the last 20 minutes when Rachel and Jamie face off against Michael. The lack of subtlety garnered a few eye rolls on the way, but I did care about them by the end. And of course you don't want to see Michael kill a child. So I was rooting for them and got sweaty palms once they were battling on the roof. With Michael himself, they continue doing a good job skirting the line between the natural and supernatural, at least ignoring the fact that I guess his eyes grew back and he somehow survived burning in Halloween 2. But honestly, you just have to go with it and treat it as more of a retcon than an actual part of the narrative. I also like the new mask. It gets a bit closer to looking human, which amps up the uncanny valley effect. He also continues to be such a curiosity. Like, you want to poke him with a stick to see what happens. Early in the movie, Loomis comes face to face with him, and the doctor tries to reason with his former patient. It ultimately amounts to nothing, but it was fascinating to watch, and I was on the edge of my seat waiting to see how Michael would react. There's also a moment where Michael picks up a shotgun, and I thought, is he going to pull the trigger? That would be very unlike Michael. But then he just takes it and impales the sheriff's daughter with it. On the other hand, there are moments where Michael starts to teleport a little too much, a trope of the slasher genre that I felt the original mostly avoided. But even in this scene, Loomis shoots Michael, and when the camera cuts back, he's just gone. And there are other moments where you just can't make sense of where he is. In the school, he's near Jamie, but a second later he's suddenly above her on some steps. It just doesn't make sense and makes me feel like I'm watching a typical slasher rather than something special like Halloween. And unfortunately, I think a lot of the special ingredients were missing in 4. The score and cinematography, which added up to that intangible atmosphere in the first one, are pretty much gone. And that naturalistic feel is mostly gone too. Partly because of the lack of subtlety I mentioned before, and partly because of the cartoonish elements that got added. For example, the movie wants to see how Haddonfield's fear of Michael Myers affects the town. So, just like Halloween Kills over 30 years later, Halloween 4 gives us an angry mob. Okay, speaking of lack of subtlety, here's how it happens. Michael kills the entire police force. Thankfully, the town has a redneck militia conveniently run by a guy named Earl. As soon as they smell trouble, they grab their shotguns and head out. Of course, they are cartoonishly inept. One guy thinks he sees Michael, so the entire mob unloads on a rustling bush, accidentally killing their friend. It's distractingly on the nose. Or when Rachel and Jamie get separated while trick-or-treating, Rachel catches a few glimpses of the shape, and no matter where he's standing, there's conveniently steam everywhere. It's a horror cliche. When you see the monster, there's steam. You can just imagine the fog machines off to the side of the camera, again, just working as hard as possible to remind you you're watching a movie. I also can't stand horror movies when characters are trapped in a house. Once Rachel, Jamie, and Brady realize Michael is in the house with them, they try to leave, but the front door is locked. From the outside, I guess. Brady shoots the door, then says, God damn it, it's metal. We're trapped in the house. Huh? It's metal? You know what's not metal? Windows. Just ask Laurie Strode. When she was trapped in the house with Michael, it was because Michael propped the doors shut to trap her inside. But she broke glass and escaped, leading to the great visual of running through the darkness between those beacons of light. All I'm saying is, if you're talking about a regular old house, I don't see how you get trapped inside, especially if you have a shotgun. And when Michael is lumbering toward Brady, why does Brady just stand there waiting for him? I get that he needs to reload, but why not get to a safe distance, then reload? When you shoot Michael and he survives, it tips things in the supernatural direction, so I get why you have to use that sparingly and avoid him getting shot too much. But when a character acts this stupid, it makes it feel contrived in a way the first movie didn't. Well, mostly. It's hard to ignore Laurie continuously tossing Michael the knife each time she incapacitates him, only for him to pick it up and attack again. But that movie did so much else right, I look past it. There's also a few moments of just awkward cinematography, like Michael throwing this guy, or when Rachel hits Michael with the pickup truck, then it cuts to him flying through the air, and they just happen to hit him right by a mine shaft, so he can conveniently fall into it after getting riddled with bullets, leaving his fate somewhat ambiguous. I could go on, but I'll stop there. All of these moments elicit eye rolls and undercut the tension. Before we move on, we do have to talk about the ending. This movie implies that the evil inside Michael is something that can infect you, or maybe there's something in the Myers DNA that predisposes one to evil. When Jamie touches her uncle's hand, his evil infects her, or perhaps activates something which was already there. As a twist, it doesn't really make sense in the context of the movie, because up until now, we had no reason to think Jamie is evil, or that Michael's evil can infect you. Honestly, it feels like the kind of twist a 12-year-old would think up. But Donald Pleasance sells it. His reaction almost makes it worth it because you just see him unload all his frustrations and regrets. He failed to stop Michael so many times. All that blood is on his hands. And now he has to watch it happen all over again. Imagine what that does to you. It shatters Loomis. You hear it in his scream, and you see it in his raising a gun at a little girl. So this is a rare case where I don't like something in concept, but actually appreciate the execution. Anyway, on to Halloween 5, The Revenge of Michael Myers, which came out the year I was born, by the way. Remember that mine shaft Michael fell down? Well, he manages to crawl to a water outlet and ride the river downstream, where he discovers a hermit living in the woods. The old man gives Michael shelter for a year while he heals up, and on the next Halloween night, he rises and kills the hermit. Also, he has a thorn tattoo on his wrist that you never noticed before. Meanwhile, Jamie is now kept at a children's clinic and has entirely stopped speaking. She's also formed a telepathic link with her uncle, possibly a result of touching his hand in 4. She convulses in shock and sees through his eyes whenever he prepares to kill. It also seems this link is what caused Jamie to attack her mother, who survived, by the way. Now healed up, Michael's first stop is the Carruthers home, where Rachel is currently alone. Their parents left on a cabin trip while she stayed behind for Jamie. The telepathic link kicks in, and although Jamie can't speak, she mouths a warning and Loomis calls the house. Rachel runs out and calls the police, but they find nothing. At the clinic, Loomis badgers Jamie, begging her to tell him what she knows about Michael. Meanwhile, Rachel heads back inside, where Michael stabs her to death with a pair of scissors. Later, Rachel's friend Tina arrives to find her missing, but assumes she's just decided at the last minute to join her parents on the trip. Then Tina is joined by her friend Sammy, and the two talk about boys until Tina's boyfriend Mikey shows up. They hop in his car and drive off. And a man in steel-toed boots gets off a bus and kicks a dog. When Loomis visits Michael's house to see if he's returned, the man follows. And the man has the same thorn tattoo as Michael. Meanwhile, Mikey drops the girls off at Quick Food Mart with Sammy's boyfriend, Spitz. Then Michael kills Mikey with a garden claw and steals his car. And that night, he steals his girlfriend, Tina gets in the car while Michael drives, though he's changed masks so he's not recognized as the killer. Instead, she just assumes her boyfriend is being unusually quiet. At her request, they stop for cigarettes. Then the telepathic link kicks in. Jamie is finally able to get out a few words that alert Loomis to Tina's location. He gets Meeker on the line, and a swarm of cops show up to the rescue. Michael drives off unseen, leaving Tina none the wiser that her boyfriend is dead. She just assumes he drove off and abandoned her. She heads to the clinic to visit a now speaking Jamie. She begs Tina to stay with her, but Tina wants to see her boyfriend, so she heads off to the Halloween party, and at Loomis's request, a couple of cops follow. And afraid for Tina's life, Jamie sneaks out with her friend Billy to follow them too. At the party, Michael kills Sammy, Spitz, and the cops. As Tina discovers the bodies, Jamie and Billy show up just in time to be chased by Michael in Mikey's car. They run into the woods where Michael crashes into a tree, turning the car chase into a foot chase. He approaches Jamie until Tina throws herself into him, sacrificing her life and giving Jamie a chance to run. Finally, Loomis and the police arrive. "Now are you willing to help me?" Loomis asks Jamie, and she is, so they follow his plan. They head to the Myers house, and Jamie sits in Michael's sister's room as bait, while the police hide. But Michael cleverly draws the police away by attacking the children's clinic first. With the place mostly cleared out, Michael kills the couple of cops remaining, wounds Loomis, and chases Jamie. Their chase ends in a sort of sanctuary Michael has arranged. Displaying Rachel's body before he kills Jamie, she catches him off guard by calling him Uncle and asking to see his face. He removes the mask and sheds a tear, then goes back into rage mode and chases her, falling right into Loomis's trap. The doctor drops a metal net on Michael and beats him senseless with a piece of wood until his heart gives out, and he collapses on top of the incapacitated Michael. Though Halloween VI later retcons this from a heart attack to a stroke. The cops put Michael in a jail cell, but the man in steel-toed boots shows up to kill everyone and free Michael. Like Halloween II, this one deserves a caveat. I won't go into all the details. For that, I recommend checking out the book Taking Shape, which goes through the making of every Halloween movie. If you're interested, I can't recommend it enough. But the TLDR for Halloween V is that every horror story you can imagine regarding studio interference applied here. Just looking at the release date should raise some red flags. It came out just 1 year after 4. This was a rushed production. The script changed often during shooting, and it shows. Where do I even start? First, the characters. This movie essentially jettisons any attempt at getting us to care about anyone before putting them in danger. I did care about Rachel by the end of 4, and she does return here, but quickly devolves into a typical slasher victim, running around naked before Michael unceremoniously kills her. In concept, that could work. Just look at Halloween's original inspiration, Psycho, where the expected star was killed off early. But in execution, it felt like a betrayal to the character because before her death, there was no fight in her at all. She came off as a totally oblivious victim. She also went frustratingly unmourned in this movie, in a way that felt contrived. Her parents went out of town, so when her friends find her missing, they don't give it a second thought. They just assume she changed her mind at the last minute and decided to join her parents without telling anyone. Not mourning its characters seems to be a consistent problem with the Halloween series. We see it with Rachel, we saw it in Halloween II when Laurie never mentions her friends, and in this one, we also see it with Sheriff Meeker. Michael killed his daughter a year ago. Maybe he's found a way to live with his grief, but I imagine that pursuing his daughter's killer should stir something in him, either grief or an intense need for revenge, but she hardly gets a mention. The other problem is that if you remove our protagonist so early, you need to give us a replacement. And what we got was Tina. There's just nothing there to endear you to her. It's frustrating to watch her ignore that Rachel is missing. It's frustrating that when she gets in the car with Michael Myers, she somehow can't tell that it's not her boyfriend. And after that close call, when Jamie begs her to stay with her, Tina comes off as selfish when she insists on leaving to be with her boyfriend. A boyfriend who, the last time she saw him, seemed to ignore her and ditch her. Because again, at the time, she didn't realize that it was actually Michael Myers and not her boyfriend, who weirdly, coincidentally, is also named Michael. I could see that working in a horror comedy where her boyfriend is so bad, she literally can't tell the difference between him and a serial killer. To be fair, she does redeem herself a bit, essentially sacrificing herself to save Jamie. Though even there, that came off as pretty stupid. Michael is slow, but he was going to catch up to Jamie because she was hurt and slowed to a crawl. If I saw Jamie crawling away from Michael, my inclination would have been to pick her up and run. But I guess throwing yourself into Michael and getting stabbed to death would also slow him down. So good job, Tina. You died a hero. The other protagonist would be Jamie, but her arc is hard to understand. Things have been retconned, so she didn't kill her foster mother, but instead attacked her, thanks to some kind of telepathic influence from Michael. Whenever Michael kills, she also suffers seizures and sees through his eyes. Huh, glad I'm not the only one. In one of the first few scenes, we see her writing during one of these attacks. So later on, when Loomis begs her for answers as to what's going on, it's frustrating that she won't communicate with him. Instead, she just draws cryptic images, even though we've already seen that she can write. When she finally gains the ability to speak, it's unclear why. I can imagine a story where she does something or overcomes something to find herself again, but instead, it just happens when the plot needs it to. And then there's Dr. Samuel Loomis. I can't say enough good things about Mr. Pleasance, but there's an elephant in the room. At this point, is a psychiatrist really what's needed to stop Michael? I mentioned that in Halloween 2, the character started to border on self-parody. Well, by Halloween 5, it's impossible to ignore that Loomis is useless against Michael. All he can do is rant about how evil he is. Now, in the first Halloween, that was enough. His job was to sound the alarm and alert us to the evil that's arrived in Haddonfield. But now, 11 years later, the alarm has been sounded several times. Beyond that, we've never seen him use his knowledge as a psychiatrist or his intellect to in any way assist in stopping Michael, beyond the obvious. Like, once we knew Michael was Laurie's sister, it doesn't take a genius to realize he's going after her. Again, it made sense in the first movie because he was the only one who knew anything about Michael and could anticipate he'd come home. But at this point, we get it. He's going to Haddonfield and he'll kill anyone related to him. Thank you, Dr. Loomis. You can go home now. There was actually an opportunity in this movie for him to do something because there is someone who needs psychiatric help, Jamie. But all we see Loomis do is yell at her or beg her to help stop Michael. I get that he's reached his breaking point, but it would have been nice to see him use his expertise first. Try to reach her in a patient, rational way, only to fail and essentially break. I did have some hope because he seems to have a plan to stop Michael, but he needs Jamie's help to pull it off. Maybe it would be a clever plan that only Loomis, with his intelligence and experience, could think up. But when she finally agrees to help, his grand plan is revealed. Use Jamie as bait. It's the sort of plan anyone could have come up with. I thought maybe he'd try to take advantage of Jamie's telepathic link with Michael. Maybe he'd try to help her understand it better so they could use it to their advantage. But nope, he just sticks Jamie in Michael's house so he can lure the shape there and hit him with a big stick. It's also worth mentioning that the telepathic link is the first time this series explicitly crossed into supernatural territory, ignoring Halloween 3. That's a big deal, and you'd like to think they wouldn't cross that threshold without a good reason. But the link between Michael and Jamie ultimately just serves as a way to retcon the ending of 4, so Jamie isn't evil, but was just influenced by Michael. Otherwise, it seems wholly unnecessary to the plot. Take the final battle, for example. When Michael lures all the cops away by attacking the children's home, the link comes into play there because Jamie detects her friend Billy being attacked. But even that's unnecessary because the cops got a distress call from the children's home anyway. Not to mention, Billy is a close friend of Jamie's, and we have no idea what happens to him. Is he okay? Did Michael kill him? We have no idea. Also, whenever the link activates, it just comes off as kind of goofy. At minimum, I wanted someone to acknowledge, hey, isn't it weird that these two people are supernaturally connected? Like, I didn't know that was a thing. I didn't think telepathy was real. That's insane, right? I'd especially like to know how Dr. Loomis, presumably a man of science, rationalizes it. But we don't get to see that. You can also tell there are a bunch of ideas that don't get fully developed. Likely holdovers from an earlier draft of the script, like the coffin of the 9-year-old girl. At one point, the sheriff is called away to the cemetery. It happened so quickly I hardly noticed it the first time I watched. After that, we don't see the cemetery or anything, but later, Loomis tells Jamie, "Today in the cemetery, somebody dug up a coffin. It was a coffin of a 9-year-old girl. What do you think he's going to do with that? You're 9 years old, aren't you, Jamie?"
What do you think he's going to do with that?
And later, in Michael's makeshift sanctuary, we see the coffin on display. I guess the implication is that Michael wanted a coffin for Jamie. But that's weird. He was already trying to kill her in the 4th movie. He didn't want a coffin for her then. And in the 1st movie, he didn't need one for Laurie. It's just an odd detail that at best adds nothing, and at worst is distracting. There's also the idea of the rage inside. After Tina is killed, Loomis shouts to Michael in the woods, telling him that if he comes to his old house, he'll find a little girl there who can stop the rage inside. Loomis says it a couple of times, and again when they're at the house face to face. It's very specific phrasing, which makes it sound like Loomis had some kind of epiphany about what drives Michael. But it's so vague and comes so late in the game, it just comes off as half-baked. I think it's meant to actually create some sympathy for Michael. There was an idea during the development for this movie to paint Michael as more of a Frankenstein monster, a creature that wreaks havoc, but at its core is misunderstood. You see a flash of this when Michael removes his mask and sheds a tear. It's a shocking image after 3 movies of a totally brutal and emotionless Michael, but again, it comes way too late in the game without any build-up. And of course, there's the Man in Black. This was not a holdover from earlier drafts. This was added during filming to set up a sequel. Suddenly, Michael has a thorn tattoo that we never noticed before, and there's a mysterious man in black with the same tattoo who appears randomly throughout the movie. And of course, in the climax, he frees Michael to set up said sequel. Even the filmmakers themselves had no idea what that tattoo was all about or who this man was. And given the complete lack of context, you can tell. So I'm all for intrigue and mystery, but not when it has absolutely nothing to do with the story being told, and when you know it can't have a satisfying payoff. Also worth mentioning, we're apparently meant to assume Loomis is dead at the end of this movie. I didn't get that at all. I assumed he just collapsed from exhaustion, but apparently that was supposed to be a heart attack. Talk about an unceremonious end for such an important character. He was the one consistent actor across the 5 Myers Halloween movies of the 70s and 80s. I'm not saying we needed a funeral and eulogy, but at minimum, make it clear what happened. Of course, this gets retconned anyway in Halloween 6, where Loomis says he had a stroke and got plastic surgery to get rid of his burn scars. There's also a bunch of examples where the movie just doesn't take itself seriously. Michael lives with a hermit for a year after trying to choke the guy out. Also, that moment just looks funny, the way he chokes him for a second and then suddenly falls down into a perfect lying position. But also, after Michael attacked him, Why would the old man take him in? And wasn't he curious about the many bullet holes in Michael or the bizarre mask he never takes off? Apparently this whole thing was a reshoot, but the original draft had a shaman bringing him back from the dead, so I don't know which version is better. There's also these two bumbling cops literally introduced with slide whistles and other goofy sounds.
All clear. Nothing above, nothing below.
Alright, I think we've talked about this movie enough. Let's go to the next one. Man, it's a waste of time. Not learning anything. Michael's been shot, stabbed, blown up, and nothing kills him. What am I supposed to do about Daniel? If only Adam were here. I bet he'd be able to think of something. If only I could talk to him somehow. Wait a minute. That's it. Alon, I got an idea. What are you doing there?
Nothing. Just thinking about stuff.
You're not thinking of becoming a serial killer, are you?
Nah.
Okay. Wait, no you aren't or no you are? It doesn't matter. I had an idea. Let's do a seance so we can contact Adam and see if he has any advice on the Daniel situation.
Seance? Somebody already killed Adam?
Yeah, Daniel got him. Wait, what do you mean already? Anyway, it doesn't matter. I gotta go watch Halloween 6. Meet me back here in a couple of hours with a Ouija board and some candles, okay? I'll see you.
Alright, good luck.
It turns out at the end of 5, when Steel-Toed Boots Man freed Michael, he took Michael and Jamie back to a secret lair located within Smith's Grove Sanitarium. He holds Jamie captive there for the next 6 years under the purview of a secret cult, apparently composed of the Smith's Grove staff. On the night before Halloween 1995, Jamie gives birth to a son as part of a cult ritual. They take him away and paint the thorn symbol on him. But one of the cult/staff members has a crisis of faith and helps Jamie and her son escape. She steals a truck and drives off as Michael pursues her, hoping to retrieve her baby. If you're wondering who the father is, by the way, it's later revealed to be Michael himself, something arranged by the cult. Meanwhile, Tommy Doyle, the boy babysat by Laurie, has grown obsessed with Michael Myers. He believes Michael will return, so he's spent the years researching and preparing. Dr. Loomis, on the other hand, has retired and spends his days writing a manuscript about the killer. Though he's surprised this evening when Dr. Terrence Wynn shows up to announce his retirement and invites Loomis to replace him. Wynn, by the way, is the guy from the first movie, the guy who postulated that Michael couldn't have gone to Haddonfield because he doesn't know how to drive. In the background of all this, radios play a call-in show all about Michael Myers, mostly attracting weirdos obsessed with him. Meanwhile, the killer chases Jamie, who's stopped at a bus depot. There, she calls into the radio show to beg for help, hoping that Loomis is out there somewhere listening. And he is. So is Tommy. Michael catches up to her, so she hides the baby at the depot, and the chase continues. Michael badly wounds her at a farmhouse, but doesn't find the baby, so he takes off, leaving her alive. At the Myers house, the Strodes have recently moved in. You heard me right. Laurie's Uncle John has moved his family there since the house was cheap after his brother's failed attempt to sell it for so many years. The abusive, alcoholic John is joined by his meek but caring wife Deborah, his teenage son Tim, and his disappointment of a daughter Kara. She's a hard-working college student, but also a single mother, raising her 6-year-old son, Danny. Recently, Danny has been having visions of Steel-Toed Boots Man telling him to kill. Danny also draws pictures involving the symbol of thorn and his entire family being murdered. Listening to Jamie's call to the radio show, Tommy hears bus announcements in the background. So he heads to the depot to investigate, where he finds a trail of blood leading to the baby. He grabs the child and brings him to the hospital, where he runs into Loomis, who's just come from the crime scene where an unconscious Jamie was discovered, along with a symbol of thorn left by Michael. They don't have a chance to talk, so Tommy tells Loomis to meet him tonight at the campus rally. As Halloween night approaches, Michael visits his home and kills Kara's mother. Meanwhile, her son bumps into Tommy and the two become friends. When Kara finds them at home later, Tommy warns her they're in danger, so they head across the street to Mrs. Blankenship's house, where Tommy's been living. There, he reveals the results of his years of research. Among ancient druids, the thorn symbol represented a demon that spread sickness and brought death to hundreds of thousands of people. According to Celtic legend, one child from each tribe was chosen to be inflicted with the curse of thorn. On the night of Samhain, the child would kill their family as a blood sacrifice to spare the rest of the tribe. Michael has been inflicted with that curse. If he succeeds in killing the last of his bloodline, Jamie and Jamie's baby, then the curse will pass to another child. And yes, this movie brings back Loomis's mispronunciation of the Celtic festival. Meanwhile, there's some more killing. The man in black visits the hospital and shoots an unconscious Jamie in the head. Michael electrocutes John, then visits the campus rally and kills the DJ who runs the call-in show that recently covered him. Then he goes back home and kills Kara's brother Tim and his girlfriend. Then a seemingly hypnotized Danny walks across the street into the Myers home. But Kara beats Michael down with a fire poker and rescues her son. They run back to Blankenship's home to find the man in black there, Terrence Wynn, head of the cult. He and his men throw Kara out a window, drug Loomis and Tommy, then kidnap Kara, her son, and the baby. Also, Mrs. Blankenship was in on it. Waking up from the drugging, Tommy and Loomis assume the rest of them were taken to Smith's Grove, so that's where they go. Finally, all is revealed. Wynn believes in the tradition of inflicting thorn on one child to bring order to everything else. So he's been Michael's guardian, helping him track down his last remaining kin to have them all killed. Tonight, the plan is to have him kill Jamie's baby, thereby completing his task. Then transfer the curse to Danny, who will then kill his own mother. Finally, Loomis will take Wynn's place as the monster's guardian. Before Michael can kill the baby, Tommy rescues them and quickly casts a spell to stop Michael from going after them. They escape, but Loomis stays behind for some unfinished business. He heads back inside to find that Michael has traded clothes with Wynn, so he can escape, disguised as the man in black. And suddenly, the mark of thorn appears on Loomis's wrist, sealing his fate as Michael's guardian. Okay, so same caveat as Halloween 5. Studio interference, competing visions, blah blah blah. In fact, the version I recapped was the producer's cut, a version released years later, closer to the original vision. And if you're going to recap the movie, you kind of have to use the producer's cut because the theatrical version is even more nonsensical than this one. Just look at the ending people saw in theaters. Michael is seemingly killed in Smith's Grove Sanitarium. The heroes drive off, but Loomis stays behind for some quote-unquote unfinished business. Cut to a shot of Michael's mask on the ground with intense music, then you just hear Loomis scream in the background. Cut to a jack-o'-lantern's candle blowing out. The audacity to release such a clearly unfinished, incomprehensible ending in theaters is almost admirable. So the producer's cut is superior only because you at least understand what you watched, but it still isn't good. I'll say up front, I don't necessarily have a problem with providing a supernatural explanation for Michael. It does go against the principles of the original and would mean you're no longer making a Halloween movie, but instead a Halloween-inspired movie. But maybe that's the lesson in all this. That movie was already made. Maybe you can't make it again. The best you can do is take inspiration from it and try something new. The problem with Halloween 6 is that the new thing they tried wasn't good and wasn't scary. Explaining Michael and essentially reducing him into a henchman for this cult makes him a lot less scary. With that removed, you've got to replace it with something else. And some people dressed in robes and one guy in steel-toed boots just can't compete with the original, enigmatic Michael Myers. But the biggest problem with this movie is its complete lack of a plot. Just look at Tommy Doyle. If you think back on the movie, you might think it's about Tommy investigating and uncovering the truth of Michael Myers. But it's not. He already did that and has all the answers before this movie even starts. The only reason we don't hear them is because he keeps getting interrupted. He tries to tell Loomis at the hospital, but somebody else walks over, so Tommy holds off. Instead, he tells him to meet him at the campus rally at 9 p.m. Why? There's a killer on the loose. There isn't a second to waste. Why not meet in an hour? Or in 10 minutes? And why at the campus rally? Why not at your house or a coffee shop? Then, at the rally, they get interrupted when Michael inexplicably shows up to kill a DJ. You might say Michael is supposed to be inexplicable, but not in Halloween 6. In this movie, his motivations are made clear. He needs to kill Jamie Lloyd's baby, Laurie Strode's grandson, so this action made no sense. Or take Danny Strode. He hears voices, threatens his grandfather with a knife, and draws pictures of himself killing his entire family. Yet his mother, Kara, does nothing about it besides this.
Stay away, monsters. Stay away, ghouls. Stay away from Danny. You jerks know the rules.
Does nothing is the mantra of every character in this movie. It basically comes down to Tommy keeps getting interrupted trying to talk to Loomis. Almost like a sitcom plot. Like a character has something really important to say, but every time he's about to say it, he slips on a banana peel, or something inexplicable happens to stop him. So they end up wasting an entire day while Michael slays Kara's entire family. And by the time Tommy and Loomis finally meet up, it's too late. The cult arrives to kidnap Kara, Danny, and Jamie's baby. That scene was absurd, by the way. Kara runs upstairs and sees that her neighbor, Mrs. Blankenship, is part of the cult and has the baby. Then Kara screams and I can't really tell, either jumps out or gets thrown out the window. Fade out, fade in on the yard. Tommy says, "I feel like I've been drugged." And Loomis says, "We have been drugged." Clearly, there's a scene missing. Maybe they ran out of time and couldn't film it, but honestly, this looks like something I would have shot in the backyard with my brothers. We should also talk about Jamie. As bad as Rachel was treated when she was brought back for Halloween 5, my God, it was so much worse for Jamie. This movie reveals that she was kidnapped at the end of Halloween 5, meaning she was in captivity for 6 years until we met her in this movie. First off, she doesn't look or act like she's been in captivity for 6 years. When she gets out of the sanitarium, she stops off to make a phone call. She's calling for help, yes, but I feel like in that situation, you get a lead foot. You just drive and drive until you're thousands of miles outside Haddonfield. Anyway, she doesn't do that and instead gets knocked unconscious by Michael. Her swan song? She dreams of the time Michael forced himself on her, his 15-year-old niece, to father a child. Then, while unconscious, she gets shot in the head. No one mourns her, no one cares. It's just awful all around. Also, if the whole point of the Curse of Thorn is to kill your family members, why would they have Michael produce another child? Doesn't that just make his job harder, adding one more person to the kill list? And that's only one aspect of their plan that makes no sense. When Loomis shows up at the sanitarium, Wynn explains that it's time for Loomis to take over as Michael's guardian. Why? Wynn says he needs to retire, but Loomis is also at retirement age, so I'm not sure he's a great replacement. Also, why in the world would Wynn expect Loomis to go along with that plan? Speaking of Loomis, considering this was Donald Pleasant's last role before passing, it's really sad how little he had to do in this movie. He's just as useless as he was in the last couple. There's one part where I couldn't help but laugh out loud. Kara asks Tommy where he's going, and Tommy says, "To find the one man who can stop him before it's too late." He's talking about Loomis. But What evidence is there that Loomis is the only man who can stop Michael? All evidence points to the contrary. In fact, Tommy seems to be the only one who can stop him, because we'll soon find out, Tommy apparently knows how to cast a spell to stop or cure Michael. I'm not exactly sure what. And by the way, the spell or the ritual is awesome. Michael is choking Tommy, and Tommy stops him by saying, "Sam Hain."
Sam Hain!
Apparently, mispronouncing the name of an old Celtic festival stops the killer dead in his tracks. Why would that work? And why would Tommy even think it would work? Just because it's the name of the festival that drives Michael to kill? I definitely see how the word is relevant, but not why it would have any effect. That'd be like thinking you can stop Batman just by saying his mom's name. Anyway, the Sam Hain thing happens after Paul Rudd puts some small acorn-looking things on the ground and smears some of his blood on the floor. I'd love to know how the hell he found out about this ritual and where he got those runes. You might be wondering if there's anything I liked about this movie. I will say that I didn't hate it right from the start. They did a decent job of setting up Kara as a sympathetic character. She's a single mother, working hard in school, dealing with an abusive alcoholic father. You're on her side. There just isn't a story for her. Like I mentioned, her whole family is slaughtered, and there's never a moment of grief. She comes home to find Tommy with her son. Her mother is inexplicably missing, but no one bats an eye. Tommy tells her she's in danger and she leaves with him, but there's no mention of, wait a minute, what happened to my mother? It's like Rachel in Halloween 5 all over again. I also like the radio show concept. As the movie opens, we hear the DJ taking calls about Michael Myers. It felt like a fun way to celebrate the legacy of the series, hearing people's thoughts on him and theories, making him feel like a legendary figure in the world, and help set the mood for the movie. Kind of like an announcer at a boxing match talking up the fighters before they take the stage. I thought it was similarly effective in Halloween Ends, which we'll get to later. Also, I'll admit, there is some fun in seeing the explanations they came up with for everything. Because imagine the mess left behind by Halloween 5. There's a thorn tattoo and a mysterious man in black. Your assignment? Use those two randomly concocted things to somehow explain and tie together the entire Michael Myers saga. And they did. They even explain why he only kills on certain Halloweens. It's only when the Thorn constellation appears. Alright, I don't think any more needs to be said about this one. Oh, except one just fun thing in this movie. In the first Halloween, Terrence Wynn is the guy who says there's no way Michael could get to Haddonfield because he doesn't know how to drive. Well, in this movie, you can assume that he's the one who taught Michael how to drive. In fact, in an earlier draft of the script, he admits as much to Dr. Loomis. So, that's pretty cool. Anyway, on to the next one. Sure, still messing with that mask, huh? Yeah. Alright, whatever. Okay, let's do this. Sam Hain, Lord of the Dead. On this Halloween night, when the curtain is down between real and unreal, bring forth Adam.
Who's that?
Says it's Adam trying to FaceTime me.
Huh?
Adam?
Hey, how's it going?
Good. I was actually just trying to reach you.
How? You weren't using a Ouija board, were you?
No.
Okay, good. Pizzazu's on a warpath right now. You don't want to give him any openings.
Adam, where are you?
I'm in hell!
Really? Like actual hell?
I don't know. People keep calling it something like an extra-dimensional pain dimension or the labyrinth, but I think it's basically hell. Hold on, Pinhead. I'm on the phone.
Pinhead? From Hellraiser?
Yeah, though he hates when people call him that.
Adam, are you okay? You look different. You look pretty weird.
You kidding me? Dude, I'm a Cenobite now. I was playing with the Lament configuration right before Daniel killed me, and it completely paid off.
Actually, that's why I called. I'm trying to figure out how to stop Daniel. Do you have any advice?
Oh yeah, they have a huge file on him down here. You know how on Earth they have satanic cults? Well, down here in hell, they have Daniel cults.
Really?
Yeah, anyway, if you want to stop him, make sure to watch Halloween 6, The Curse of Michael Myers. But make sure you watch the producer's cut.
I already did. I just finished watching it.
Okay, good. So you already know.
You're talking about the ritual Paul Rudd does at the end? That would actually work?
It's worth a shot.
Well, what about those magic acorn things he puts down? Where do I get those?
That's the one part they got wrong. You don't need magic acorns. You need something else.
What do I need?
What's the source of Daniel's power? What's the source of your power? They're one and the same.
Adam, I don't know what that means.
Think about it. It's obvious. Those key to the power.
Adam, I can't hear you.
A bag of do whatever you.
Wait, Adam, what's the source of my
Rob
power?
Zombie.
What are you trying to tell me, Adam?
Warning.
Disconnected. Damn it. What's the source of my power? What even is my power? I don't get it. Alon, what do you think?
Man, this sucks. I don't know how to stop Daniel. Each of these movies is worse than the last. I feel like I'm in hell. Whatever, maybe they get better. Halloween, H2O. Here we go.
Halloween H2O is the first Halloween movie to pretend certain previous entries didn't happen. This one wipes Halloween 4 through 6 from continuity and acts as a direct sequel to Halloween 2. 20 years after the events of that movie, Michael Myers breaks into the home of Marion Chambers, the nurse who accompanied Loomis in 1978. There, he checks her files on Laurie Strode to discover where his sister is hiding. And while he's at it, Michael kills Marion and her teenage neighbors. Laurie Strode, meanwhile, lives under the assumed identity of Carrie Tate after faking her own death. She's the head mistress of a private prep boarding school and has a 17-year-old son named John who goes there. And she's still traumatized by her brush with evil. She often has nightmares and has become a functional alcoholic. She is supported, however, by her caring boyfriend Will, though she's yet to tell him who she really is. John, on the other hand, understands his mother's trauma and tries to be caring, but feels smothered by her overprotective nature. Today, Halloween, he asks permission to go on the annual school camping trip, but as always, she forbids it. But throughout the day, it bothers her that she seems to be losing John. They have a tense confrontation when she catches him sneaking off campus. It ends with John pointing out that Myers is dead. If he wasn't, wouldn't he have shown up by now? What's he waiting for? And finally, he says, "If you want to stay handcuffed to your dead brother, that's fine, but you're not dragging me along. Not anymore." And he storms off. Later, Laurie acquiesces, handing John the needed permission slip. But by then, he's already decided to skip the trip anyway, so he can stay behind with Molly, his girlfriend who found out she can't go on the trip, thanks to financial aid issues. Their two friends Charlie and Sarah make up excuses so they can stay behind too. The four plan on having their own private Halloween party, something John was never allowed to participate in growing up. Night falls and school buses carry most of the campus residents to Yosemite, telling Michael that it's time. He sneaks past the guard onto school grounds. The teens prepare for their Halloween party, while at home, Laurie finally confesses the truth to Will, that she is Laurie Strode. Then she has a startling realization. She was 17 when Michael came after her, the same age her son is now. She frantically grabs the phone, but finds the lines down, and discovers John stayed behind. She grabs her gun and bumps into Ronnie, who tells her about a strange car at the gate. They're skeptical, but Laurie knows the truth. Michael has returned. Charlie is the first victim. He heads upstairs in search of a corkscrew, and Sarah soon finds him stuffed in the dumbwaiter with his throat cut. Michael sneaks up behind her, so she crawls inside to escape. He manages to slash her thigh first. She takes the dumbwaiter up, but as she crawls out, Michael cuts the rope, causing it to fall. Her leg is badly crushed, so she's slowed to a crawl, allowing Michael to easily catch up and kill her. Hearing the commotion, John and Molly head up and find Michael. They run. He catches up, but they manage to fight him off and get to Laurie at the dorms. She shuts the door in Michael's face, but through the window, looks into the eyes of her brother. John and Molly hide while Laurie looks for Michael. When a figure sneaks around the corner, Will takes her gun and fires, but realizes he's accidentally shot Ronnie, the security guard. As he mourns his error, Michael arrives and kills Will. Laurie runs. She uses blood to lure Michael, then smashes him over the head with a fire extinguisher. Then joins John and Molly. They drive to the gate and Laurie gets out of the car. She tells them to keep driving, she'll stay behind and finally finish this. The two fight. Both are hurt, but the confrontation ends with Laurie stabbing him in the chest repeatedly and knocking him from a balcony. She prepares to stab him again just to be sure he's dead, but Ronnie, having apparently survived, stops her, assuring that he's already dead. The police arrive, but before they can cart off Michael's body, Laurie steals the coroner's van and drives off. She won't leave without making certain he's dead. Sure enough, the body bag wriggles. Michael emerges. Laurie slams on the brakes, sending him flying through the windshield. He gets back up, so she drives through him, sending them both careening down a hill. Laurie escapes the van while it crashes into Michael, pinning him against a tree. She approaches him. "Michael," she says. He reaches out to his sister, and for a moment, she seems to reach back, but instead swings the axe to remove his head.
That was actually pretty good. All right, now I just got to do the review. Got to get back to set. I hope the coast is clear.
This was an interesting movie to watch because growing up, it was the first Halloween movie I was aware of. I wasn't born yet for most of them, and was too young when 6 came out, but I remember seeing commercials for Halloween H2O. I remember being very confused by that title, thinking it had something to do with water. 20 years later, I'm still confused because the official title is Halloween H2O 20 years later, but I thought H2O stood for Halloween 20 years later. So I guess the full title is Halloween 20 years later, 20 years later. And from this point on, I promise to stop saying the phrase 20 years later. Anyway, this movie brought Halloween into the 90s and escaped the degrading continuity that began with Halloween 4. Nowadays, it's not unusual to have a legacy sequel that ignores the less favorable entries in a franchise. But H2O did it long before it was cool. This movie mostly wiped the slate clean by pretending Halloween 4 through 6 didn't happen. Though it's worth mentioning that wasn't always the plan. They had considered incorporating the events of those movies, saying Laurie abandoned her daughter thinking it would keep her safe. Knowing Jamie ultimately got killed was going to be a major source of grief for Laurie, which, considering this franchise's consistent failure to acknowledge grief, that would have been welcome. But it would also invite in the supernatural baggage from 5 and 6 and probably make for a more intimidating viewing experience for people who didn't watch those movies. So it was probably for the best. When you watch this movie after watching any of the originals, you almost get whiplash because the tone is so different. This movie feels a lot less like Halloween and a lot more like Scream. Even as a kid, I could tell H2O was part of a trend because the commercials so reminded me of the commercials for Scream 2, The Faculty, or I Know What You Did Last Summer. Basically, self-aware horror movies about sarcastic teenagers who feel straight out of Dawson's Creek. By the way, every movie I just named was written by the same guy, Kevin Williamson, and I don't know if this is relevant at all, but he also created Dawson's Creek. Anyway, after the success of Scream, everyone wanted Kevin Williamson, so they tried to get him for Halloween 7, which was already being talked about as a 20-year anniversary to bring back Jamie Lee Curtis. He was too busy, but did write a treatment for it and consulted on the writing. Like I said, The movie feels like a kindred spirit to Scream, so his fingerprints are all over it. In fact, it even borrows some score from Scream. The movie also has a lot of in-jokes and references. Jamie Lee Curtis's mother, Janet Leigh, appears. Not as Laurie's mother, but she does at one point offer some advice, prefacing it with, "If I could be maternal for a moment." One of John's friends gives him a hard time, saying he needs to get away from his mom, or 20 years from now, he's still going to be living with her, probably running some weird motel out in the middle of nowhere. A reference to Norman Bates, who did exactly that in the movie Psycho, which influenced Halloween and starred Janet Leigh. And there's a scene where the characters are watching Scream 2, which is awesome because in Scream, the characters watch Halloween. So it's like a weird circular reference where both movies exist as fictional within each other's universes. There's also a scene where Laurie hears Mr. Sandman on the radio, the song which opened and closed Halloween 2. The list goes on. So this movie feels very different from Halloween. In a weird way, it almost feels more grounded because Michael no longer comes off as a strange, evil force. There's no Dr. Loomis in this movie, other than the great opening credits that pay homage to him, where another actor performs his monologue about meeting Michael over newspaper clippings, briefly recapping things up to this point. But other than that, there's no one in this movie telling us that Michael isn't human, or that he's pure evil. In fact, he comes off as pretty human in this movie. For him to find Laurie, he had to track down Marion and go through her files to figure out Laurie lives under an assumed identity. That shows intelligence and reading comprehension, which you don't expect from an enigmatic force of nature. Laurie also often calls him my brother, which is in sharp contrast to Loomis calling him it, or the evil. But, like I've said so many times, it's okay to take something off the table as long as you replace it with something else. In this case, we lost the enigma of Michael Myers, but replaced it with a fun, Scream-like tone and an efficient, effective thriller. I'd also add that making Michael more human makes him feel more vulnerable, which means characters actually have a chance against him, which means the outcome is not assured. They might get away. I sometimes find with horror that when the threat is too powerful and death is guaranteed, I don't really feel any suspense because I know there's no chance of escape. I can't think, I hope they get away, if I know they won't. At an hour and 26 minutes, this is also the shortest Halloween movie and speaks to that efficiency. They're not trying to explain Michael's motivation or explore some convoluted supernatural plot. They're just trying to build and release tension, and they mostly do a great job. Do they get us to care about the main characters and give them clear needs, strong enough that they could carry a story even if a horrific threat never arrived? Absolutely. Laurie is still plagued by trauma, which has turned her into a functional alcoholic and an overbearing mother. Her son John loves her, but both are aware that her overprotective nature is creating a rift between them. She also wants to get closer with her boyfriend Will, but isn't necessarily ready to tell him who she really is. And later in the movie, when she finally opens up, I felt something, in large part thanks to Jamie Lee Curtis's performance. All this creates great drama that connects me with the characters, so when Michael shows up, I care. Even LL Cool J's supporting character Ronnie had a little mini arc. He wants to be a writer, and at first, you can tell his wife isn't very supportive. But by the end, he's won her over. It sounds corny, but that little bit of character building had me rooting for him to survive. They also do a great job of drawing out the tension in Michael's attacks, because his victory doesn't seem assured every time. He doesn't just pop out of the shadows, kill someone, and then disappear. You get real, visceral struggle. My favorite example is Sarah. Early in the movie, the characters use a dumbwaiter, and the moment you see it, you know it'll somehow come into play later. By the way, contrast that to Halloween V, which shows us a laundry chute, and similarly, you know it'll come into play, but they couldn't find an organic way to show it to us. Loomis goes to the Myers house to investigate. Nothing comes from the scene except that he looks at the laundry chute. It's basically the movie saying, hey, you see this thing? Yeah, remember this for later. Here, The dumbwaiter serves a functional purpose. John uses it to send flowers and a love note to Molly. Later, Sarah uses it to escape Michael, but as she crawls out of it, Michael cuts the rope and the dumbwaiter falls, crushing her leg. It's such an effective moment because it's the kind of thing we've all thought about. Walking under a garage door or out an elevator, you think, what if it falls while I'm under it? Then she crawls, trying to escape, but ultimately, Michael gets her. In terms of overall quality, if I were to compare this to the original Halloween, I would say it's lacking in the sense that it doesn't feel very unique. The score is familiar, the tone is familiar, the villain feels a lot more human and less intriguing, so this movie doesn't bring much new to the table, but it takes a formula and executes it pretty well, making it worthwhile. There were a couple of little things that bugged me. Laurie is a functional alcoholic in this movie, meaning she drinks a lot, but thus far has not allowed it to ruin her life or cause her to abdicate any responsibilities. That feels a little too clean to me. I would have liked to have seen some sign that it was negatively impacting her, or had the potential to. As it stands, it serves more as an easy way to say, look how traumatized she is. And I think that's just a side effect of this movie's efficiency. They really tried to give just enough to connect us with the characters so we can get to the actual suspense. Speaking of efficiency, it's almost too efficient. I was really enjoying everything with Michael's killing spree at the end, but it's over so fast. Once Laurie finds out that Michael is back, it's only 9 minutes of runtime before she's effectively killed him. In a way, it's a compliment. It's me saying, I liked this and I wish it could have been more drawn out. Another thing that bugged me, at one point, Will accidentally shoots Ronnie, mistaking him for Michael. Then, in a ridiculous fake-out, it turns out Ronnie survived. And what does he do with his second lease on life? He stops Laurie from stabbing Michael a few more times to make sure he's dead. He keeps telling her, he's dead, shh, he's dead, he's dead. After watching people think Michael is dead, only for him to get back up again so many times, it's incredibly frustrating to watch Ronnie stop her here. Maybe he is dead, but why not make sure? And Ronnie didn't take his pulse. He can't know for sure he's dead. And let's say he is dead. Let Laurie have this. She's lived with the trauma of Michael Myers for 20 years. Let her stab him a few times. That moment really pissed me off. Then, when Michael is bagged and loaded into the ambulance, Laurie steals it to make sure he's dead, which I can appreciate. And in a very badass maneuver, she drives but suddenly comes to a stop, throwing Michael through the windshield. Then she drives into him, okay, cool so far, and then crashes off a hill, sending the ambulance rolling in a way that would probably kill her or knock her unconscious, but like an action hero, she manages to somehow leap from the violently careening vehicle to escape it, while letting it crash into Michael, pinning him against a tree branch. And that moment looks pretty funny, by the way. It was just too much and not believable at all. But I love the moment it leads to. After so many moments of letting Michael get up and walk away or leaving him with an ambiguous death, Laurie says screw it. He reaches up as if asking for mercy and one last connection with his sister, and she responds by cutting his head off with an axe. A great, triumphant ending. After playing a victim to be rescued at the end of Halloween and Halloween II, Laurie finally saves herself and slays her foe. Well, Michael is dead, and I assume Laurie went on to live happily ever after, so I wonder what the next one is about. I'm guessing they probably went a different direction with it. Maybe it's like Halloween 3, where it's not even about Michael. Well, let's have a look and see what's in store in what would technically be Halloween 8. Halloween Resurrection. That's not a good sign. Well, let's give it a chance. It turns out the man placed in a body bag at the end of H2O was not Michael Myers, but a paramedic he managed to swap places with. Michael crushed the man's larynx so he wasn't able to speak or tell Laurie she got the wrong guy. Traumatized by decapitating an innocent father of 3, Laurie ends up institutionalized at Grace Anderson's sanitarium, where she fakes an extreme dissociative disorder. On Halloween night 2001, Michael shows up at the sanitarium and kills... Wait a minute, this can't be right. Michael kills Laurie Strode, but first she kisses him. 1 year later, an online reality show named Dangertainment invites college students to Michael Myers' childhood home to search for clues about his past. The show is run by Freddy, played by Busta Rhymes, and among the participants are Sarah and her friends. Each is equipped with a head-mounted camera that streams their point of view live to the internet. Right away, they start to discover clues that Michael was abused as a child. But it doesn't take long for them to realize those clues were planted to make for a more interesting show. The clues may be fake, but all too real is Michael Myers himself, who apparently returned home. He soon kills everyone, leaving only Sarah and Freddy alive. Thankfully for Sarah, she's been texting with a guy named Deckard. Watching from afar, he's able to guide her. Like when a door isn't available, he suggests maybe she leave through a window. When she's attacked, Freddy comes to the rescue using kung fu he learned watching Bruce Lee movies. But he's ultimately stabbed while giving Sarah a chance to escape. When cornered in the garage, Sarah attacks Michael with a chainsaw and accidentally starts an electrical fire, knocking her down and trapping her under some cables. As Michael gets back up, Busta Rhymes busts into the room and says, "Trick or treat, motherfucker," revealing he survived the stabbing. The two fight again, and when all hope seems lost, Freddy electrocutes Michael's testicles.
Look, I'll admit, getting electrocuted in the testicles is pretty funny, but it doesn't belong in a Halloween movie. What were they thinking?
Then they leave him to burn, as Freddy turns one more time to say, "Happy f***ing Halloween." Outside, Freddy talks to the news cameras and sets the record straight. Michael Myers isn't some soundbite or celebrity gossip. He's a killer shark in baggy-ass overalls that gets his kicks off of killing everything and everyone that he comes across. That's all. They're done dancing for the cameras. At the morgue, Michael Myers opens his eyes and makes this sound.
Does this one even require explanation? The first 15 minutes of the movie are a total betrayal of Halloween H2O's ending. Apparently the filmmakers behind that movie intended for it to be a conclusive ending with Michael Myers dead. But the producers insisted they secretly film Michael swapping places with the paramedic, so in whatever sequel that followed, they could keep him alive. At the same time, Jamie Lee Curtis wanted a conclusive ending for her character, which she figured meant one of them, Michael or Laurie, had to be dead. If not him, then it had to be her. So she only agreed to appear on the condition that they kill her. The point is that no one writing those first 15 minutes thought they were creatively the right way to go. Instead, it was just a combination of desires from the studio and Jamie Lee Curtis. It should also be noted that the first 15 minutes have essentially nothing to do with the rest of the movie. No one in this movie mourns Laurie or cares that she died. I guess the son she reconciled with in the last movie has abandoned her. Obviously, it's just tacked on, retcon nonsense, and a way to reset things so the actual movie can start. Regarding the actual movie, I have no problem with the idea of an internet reality show in Michael Myers' house. It's definitely a risky idea that could come off as horribly cheesy, but I'll give any idea a chance. I could even imagine a scenario where the idea is used to provide commentary on how or why we enjoy horror movies. This movie would allow that because you'd effectively have an audience surrogate with everyone watching the online stream. And I think that was the original intent, but studio interference, blah blah blah, you get the drill. In the movie we got, the reality show element amounts to nothing at all. The only audience we see is Sarah's friend Deckard. He's at a Halloween party, but sneaks into another room so he can watch. Throughout the movie, we cut back to the party every once in a while, but not to show anything interesting. Just people walking in and saying things like, "Hey, is this that Michael Myers thing? Oh, cool, cool." Or, "What's this?" Well, they're exploring the house of a mass murderer. live. Want to watch? Sure. The most they do with these scenes is that when the killing starts, everyone assumes it's part of the show and cheers. But of course, Deckard knows it's real. How? Because he's that character, the one who knows the thing no one else does. The other way the reality show element is used is that we often cut to a view from one of the characters' head-mounted cameras, which just means that sometimes the movie becomes really choppy and grainy for no reason. You could imagine a version of the movie that entirely takes the found footage approach, which has been done to great effect in other movies, but not here. You'll also notice that my recap was pretty light on details. That's because nothing noteworthy happens until Michael starts killing. It's just characters getting startled, tripping, pulling pranks, or flirting. Even that would be okay if it helped us get to know the characters, or somehow endeared us to them, like the original Halloween did with Laurie. But beyond one or two personality traits, we know hardly anything about these characters and have no reason to care whether any of them live or die. Sarah Moyer is meant to be the main character, and she is just nothing. She looks bored the entire movie, and we know nothing about her at all. She has a couple of close friends, Jen and Rudy, but about halfway through, I actually forgot that she knows them already, because after we meet them, the movie introduces a whole other cast of supporting characters, and they just got lost in the shuffle for me. Take this moment, for example. Sarah and Rudy are in a room with Michael, and she just runs away without saying anything or trying to get her supposed friend to follow. Could you imagine Laurie leaving Annie or Linda behind to die? And a moment later, Rudy lures Michael away and sacrifices himself to save Sarah. Yet she hardly bats an eye. At least give me a, "Rudy, no!" or show some hesitation in letting your friend die to save you. This is also shortly after her other friend was beheaded in front of her. And still, we just get the same bored expression. And while Rudy is buying her time, she just hides upstairs. Yes, the front door is locked from the outside, but it's an old house. I'm sure you can find a way out. Maybe kick some of the boards off one of the windows. This is another horror movie trope I hate, and Halloween IV did the same thing, where these old wooden houses somehow become impregnable fortresses. And no matter what, characters always go up. If you have a choice between running down or upstairs, they always choose up, all because the script wants them to get cornered by the bad guy. So the only escape is a dangerous trek off the roof. Sarah also has that internet friend Deckard, real name Miles Barton, who she's never met in the real world. The idea seems to be that she's shy and reserved, but is able to talk to this guy. But we don't see any of their conversation other than, "Hey, you're not going to believe it. I was chosen for Dangertainment." You can tell they only introduced this relationship so they could have someone from the outside interact with Sarah while she's in the house. But even that never amounts to anything. The advice he gives is generally pretty useless. Like after Rudy lures Michael away and Sarah locks herself in a room upstairs, the help Deckard offers is to tell her Michael is in the hallway. Don't scream, which causes her to scream, giving away her location. Then she just sits there waiting until Deckard tells her, "Hey, maybe try escaping through the window." Is this really helping? Whether Michael was coming for her or not in that particular moment, getting out of the house should be a top priority. Does she really need someone to tell her, "Hey, before Michael kills you, you should try to escape"? If doors are not an option, you might consider other wall holes, like a window, for instance. My favorite Deckard text is after Sarah survives the ordeal. "You're alive!" Thank you, Deckard. You're the real hero. Also, if Sarah has a phone, I assume some of the other characters had phones. So, did no one think to call the police? You might hear me complain about not connecting with characters and think, is that really necessary? By default, don't you root for humans to not get murdered? Yes, I'll admit that if a movie feels real, that'll turn my stomach. And I think that's a large part of why the first Halloween worked, in addition to Laurie easily winning us over to her side. But this movie doesn't endear you to any of the characters, and it doesn't come close to feeling real. Like Busta Rhymes, for instance. Hey, Nothing wrong with casting a rapper in your movie. LL Cool J did a great job in H2O. But the Freddy character is a cartoon. He does kung fu moves on Michael while mimicking the same sort of sounds Bruce Lee made.
So you want to be on Dangertainment?
He's unscathed by Michael's attacks because test audiences didn't want him to die, so they brought him back for the finale, totally undercutting any attempt at making Sarah the heroine because she has to be rescued time and time again. It's laughable to think that the filmmakers were hoping Sarah could replace Laurie in the franchise. Even when Sarah goes after Michael with a chainsaw, she only manages to accidentally start a fire and get herself tangled in some wires, until Freddy comes to the rescue. The whole movie feels slapped together. Like there's one point later in the movie where one girl finds a hidden part of the house where Michael has been living. Then he shows up and the Halloween theme plays while he chases her. Why was this moment chosen to feature that theme? As though it represents the triumphant return of Michael Myers. But by this point in the movie, we've already seen plenty of Michael, and we've seen him kill several characters. Apparently, before H2O, Halloween almost became a straight-to-video series, but Jamie Lee Curtis's return convinced the studio to put it in theaters. Resurrections is so bad, it doesn't even deserve video. This should have been straight to Quibi, or maybe one of those low-res movies released on Game Boy Advance cartridges. Anyway, enough of this one, on to the next one.
I can't take it anymore. For every good Halloween movie, there's 5 bad ones, and I'm not any closer to stopping Daniel. I gotta take a break or something.
God, I'd give anything for a drink. My goddamn soul just for a glass of beer. Daniel?
No. Don't you recognize me?
Lloyd, of course. Great to see you. Little slow tonight, isn't it?
Yes, it is, Mr. Take. What'll it be?
Now I'm awfully glad you asked me that, Lloyd, because I just happen to have 2 20s and 2 10s right here in my wallet. I was afraid they'd be there till next April. So here's what. You slip me a bottle of bourbon, a glass, and some ice. You can do that, can't you, Lloyd? You're not too busy, are you?
No, sir. I'm not busy at all.
Good man. You set 'em up, and I'll knock 'em back, Lloyd, one by one.
How are things going?
Things could be better, Lloyd. A whole lot better.
I will admit, we're getting worried.
What do you mean by that?
I and others have come to believe that your heart isn't in it, that you haven't the belly for it. You have 5 Halloween movies left, and yet here you are, drinking pretend bourbon and spoofing the wrong movie.
Damn it, you're right. I don't have time for this.
I'm in hell? Damn it! How am I supposed to finish watching all the movies now?
Just watch them here.
Adam? You have the Halloween movies here?
Some of them.
Which ones?
5, 6, Resurrection, and the Rob Zombie ones. We're working on getting kills and possibly ends.
Why those ones?
You know why.
Fair enough. Alright, let's watch the Rob Zombie movies. By the way, do you have a set I can use to record my reviews after I'm done? Preferably an exact replica of the set I use on Earth?
Absolutely. Well, wait, Gil, before you go, Connell Cochran says there's going to be a big show later. He wants you to wear this while you watch.
Okay, cool. Thanks. By the way, for both of the Rob Zombie movies, we'll be watching the director's cut. These are Rob Zombie's preferred versions.
and the versions most commonly available now, even in hell. It's Halloween 1990 in Haddonfield, Illinois. Michael Myers is a 10-year-old boy and already exhibiting disturbing behavior. He hides his face behind a clown mask and enjoys murdering small animals. Not helping matters is his dysfunctional family. His mother's boyfriend Ronnie is an abusive alcoholic, and his older sister Judith often teases him. However, Michael gets along with his mother Deborah and his baby sister Angel, who he affectionately calls Boo. At school, Michael is picked on by a bully named Wesley, who teases Michael over his mother's job as a sex worker. Their fight lands Michael in the principal's office, and his mother is called in. Besides the fight, the principal also shares what they found in Michael's backpack: a dead cat and photos of mutilated animals. He calls in child psychologist Dr. Samuel Loomis, but Deborah isn't ready to admit that Michael requires psychiatric help. After school, Michael follows Wesley into the woods and beats him to death with a tree branch. That night, Halloween night, Michael's mother goes to work and his sister bails on taking him trick-or-treating, opting instead for an intimate night with her boyfriend Stephen. And Michael opts for his first murder spree, killing Ronnie and Stephen. For his final kill of the night, he dons Stephen's pale Halloween mask and murders Judith. Deborah returns home to find Michael on the front porch, wearing his clown mask and cradling Boo. Michael is brought to Smith's Grove Sanitarium, and over the years, Loomis attempts to reach him, but gets nowhere. The boy instead becomes more withdrawn and develops a stronger affinity for masks. After he kills again, this time a nurse, it becomes too much for Deborah, and she takes her own life. After 15 years, Michael has grown into a towering, silent monster. One night, a guard and his cousin drag a patient into Michael's room and force themselves on her. When they mess with one of his masks, he easily kills them both. Then he kills everyone between him and escape, including Ismael Cruz, a guard who was nothing but good to him over the years. On the way to Haddonfield, he kills a trucker and trades his hospital robes for the man's coveralls. The next day, Halloween, Laurie's father asks her to drop off some paperwork at the Myers house. Inside, Michael has returned home to retrieve the same mask and knife he used 15 years earlier. He watches Laurie leave with Tommy Doyle and smells the papers she left behind. From there, the movie broadly follows the original. Throughout the day, Laurie notices someone watching her, while her friends Annie and Linda don't, or at least aren't as bothered by it. Loomis finds Judith Myers' grave missing, though in this version, Michael has left a crucified animal in its place. And when night begins, so does the killing. In Zombie's version, Myers skips Annie and goes straight for Bob and Linda, who conveniently use his abandoned childhood home as their love shack, rather than the Wallace's home. Another change is that Michael next visits the Strode's home, where he kills Laurie's parents. Tragically, before her mother dies, she sees Michael stare at Laurie's photo, so she gets the idea that he's going after her too. First, he visits the Wallace's home, where Annie is babysitting Lindsay. For now, though, he only watches. Meanwhile, Loomis finds Annie's father, Sheriff Lee Brackett, and warns that Michael is in town. The sheriff is skeptical. Loomis recently published a book about Michael, so many view him as having profited off the town's tragedy. But Loomis is insistent, giving a speech about Michael's eyes, similar to the one he gave in the 1978 original. Though here, he adds that he believes Michael returned for his sister, the baby he spared 15 years ago. Brackett calls the Strodes, but gets no answer, so they leave to check on them. On the way, he reveals the truth. When Deborah Myers committed suicide, he worried the baby would suffer the stigma of being Michael Myers' sister, so he omitted her from the report and dropped her off in another town's ER. Coincidentally, 3 months later, the Strodes adopted that baby and called her Laurie. Meanwhile, just like in the original, Annie drops Lindsay off with Laurie so she can hang out with her boyfriend Paul. This time, rather than Annie, Michael kills Paul and severely wounds her. Later, Laurie finds her bleeding out and calls the police, but but is attacked by Michael. He chases her to the Doyle's house where she barricades with Tommy and Lindsay. A couple of cops come to help, but Michael kills them both. Then he knocks out Lori and kidnaps her. She wakes up in Myers' basement to a macabre display. Linda's body in front of Judith Myers' grave. Michael approaches and appears to seek an emotional connection. He removes his mask and shows a photo of them both as children, though Lori recognizes neither. But seeing his cry for help, she plays along, slowly approaching, promising she wants to help before grabbing his knife and plunging it into his neck. That subdues him for a bit, but soon the chase continues. He comes after her again as Loomis arrives, begging him to stop before putting 3 bullets in his former patient. But even that isn't enough. Michael returns again. In round 2, he incapacitates Loomis and tackles Lori off the second-floor balcony. She pulls herself together, points Loomis's gun at her brother's face, and it clicks through 2 empty chambers. Before her third pull, Michael grabs her hand, either in an attempt to stop her or perhaps to help steady her hand. This time, the gun fires, and Lori screams as the police arrive.
As much as some of these Halloween movies are terrible, I find it fascinating to watch the progression of the series over time. Because if you think about that first movie, it really isn't suited for a sequel. An evil husk of a man kills people while said people try to get away. And to stay true to the original, you can't kill Michael, you can't develop him any further as a character, and you can't delve into his backstory. Doing any of those things either halts the franchise or ruins the mystery, turning Michael into just an average slasher. So, what do? It's fun to watch all the different answers they came up with, and seeing how each time a continuity hits a brick wall, they hit the reset button. They reset after 6, wiping 4 through 6 from continuity, and then they really hit reset after Resurrection by starting over completely. It's worth pointing out that most of the rules around Michael Myers came from producer Mustafa Akkad. He was really protective of the franchise and always wanted to make sure it had sequel potential baked in. In fact, John Carpenter almost returned to at least oversee Halloween 4, but the script was going to take things in a really different direction, which Akkad halted. After that, he bought out Carpenter's share of the franchise and took complete control, resulting in 4 through 6. Mustafa was tragically killed in 2005, leaving his son Malik in charge. He was much more willing to experiment with the formula and take risks. That's why Rob Zombie was allowed to make something so different with his remake in 2007. The biggest and most controversial change is that Rob Zombie spent nearly 40 minutes with a young, speaking Michael Myers, filling out his backstory. I actually have no problem with that. It does ruin the enigma and fundamentally change the character, but you can make a good movie without enigma. You may just have to ask whether or not it should carry the Halloween or Michael Myers brand. But that's a separate question from, is the movie, taken on its own terms, any good? I'd say the answer is mixed, but mostly no. I did find the first 40 minutes hard to look away from. It's always fascinating to get into the mind of a killer because it's so outside our normal experience. So although it was always considered forbidden ground, morbid curiosity made Michael's backstory something I wanted to see, though that's partly offset by some annoying characters. Rob Zombie definitely has a certain style of dialogue, which at the best of times shows us sadistically fun characters like Captain Spaulding, but at worst offends the senses with loud, obnoxious characters that make you want to hit the mute button, and that's basically Michael's entire family. It's no wonder he killed them all. Regarding young Michael, there's nothing all that surprising revealed. If you Google signs of a potential psychopath, copy and paste them all, and you get Michael Myers. Tortures small animals, he's abused, he lives in a broken home, etc. On the other hand, usually you only read about these things or hear about them. It's rare to actually see them, and to see them is disgustingly watchable. It's Rob Zombie's brand, nastiness, which if you're strong of stomach, is hard to look away from. We actually see Michael beat another child to death. Rob Zombie is sometimes accused of going too far with his violence. but his point is that violence is awful and should be off-putting, rather than reveled in, as it so often is in horror. And this violence is definitely off-putting. Malcolm McDowell also gives a great performance worthy of Dr. Loomis. His attempt to treat Michael is something we only ever heard about in the original. To actually see it is fascinating. It's slightly undercut by the foreknowledge of what Michael becomes. There isn't a lot of suspense around will Loomis succeed in reaching the child, but it's fascinating to be a fly on the wall. McDowell also does a great job exuding intelligence, rationality, dignity, and confidence. What happens when such a force meets pure evil? That question had my eyes glued to the screen when Loomis was introduced. The only thing I didn't like about the Loomis and Michael interactions were some cheesy moments of voiceover, where Loomis will say things like, "Michael's so-called normal moments are becoming fewer and fewer, and I'm particularly worried about this. I believe that these masks have begun to create a mental sanctuary in which Michael can hide within himself and from himself." Seeing Michael's transformation into a full-on monster is what we want to see in these scenes, so papering over it with voiceover was a little frustrating. I wasn't surprised to learn afterward that these were recorded later on for the director's cut, and they really do feel tacked on. When we finally time skip to Michael as an adult, I love the reveal of how big he's grown. He's played by Tyler Mane, a professional wrestler. As I've said a few times, when you mess with the Halloween formula, like removing the enigma of Michael Myers, you take something off the table. The question is, do you replace it with anything? In this case, Rob Zombie replaced it with a terrifying prospect. He introduced us to a sadistic monster of a child. But at least it's a child who is small, and as long as you weren't taken by surprise, you could take him in a one-on-one match. But what happens if you take that child and turn him into a 6'9" behemoth? At the 40-minute mark, when we meet Giant Michael, you just feel terrified at the havoc this thing is going to wreak. And thanks to Malcolm McDowell's performance, I felt the heartbreak of his giving up. I bought that he wanted to help Michael and tried to do so for 15 years, but genuinely could not do anything else for him. This is in stark contrast to John Carpenter's take, where Loomis spent half that time trying to keep Michael locked up. Zombie took that off the table, but in its place gave us this tragic Loomis who knows he failed. Though Donald Pleasance's version gets there too. From there, the movie starts to lose me. I didn't love the first half, but like I said, there was a morbid curiosity that kept me watching. The second half, on the other hand, is when the movie really goes into remake mode, and it just pales in comparison to Carpenter's. One of the most important things is getting us to care about the characters in Michael's crosshairs, and honestly, they're just too annoying. When we first meet Linda, she's complaining about getting in trouble at cheerleading after suggesting,
"Hey, why don't we just racket commando, flash some snatch, and maybe nobody will notice we're doing the same."
Then claims her French teacher was flirting with her, then wonders if Annie's dad is flirting with her, and everything is said as if it's the absolute funniest thing in the world.
"You should date him."
These things make the movie grating to watch, and often makes the dialogue sound cartoonish and unrealistic. It's worth noting that Rob Zombie initially wanted this to be two movies, one focused on Michael's childhood and the other on his return to Haddonfield. He ended up having to combine them into one, and perhaps that explains some of why it's harder to connect with the characters. He only got half a movie to both establish them and have them face off against Michael. Though, also to be fair, Michael becomes an adult at the 40-minute mark, leaving an hour and 20 minutes for the rest of the movie, and the original was only an hour and a half in total, so it probably could have worked. I did find some of the chase genuinely suspenseful between Michael and Laurie at the end. Rob Zombie did a good job of drawing it out in a way that didn't feel inorganic. I also enjoy Rob Zombie's visual style. He's not afraid to move and shake the camera when it makes sense to reflect the chaos of what's happening, but he doesn't overdo it as so many movies do to nauseating effect. I'm also glad that Danielle Harris, i.e. Jamie from Halloween 4 and 5, got another shot at the franchise, this time playing Annie Brackett. Though having known her as a child in those movies, it was at times really off-putting to see her half naked and bleeding to death. That's obviously not something I can hold against the movie, but there are certain parts where her facial expression just looks so much like a young Jamie that it was hard to watch. The bottom line for me with this movie is that it's a nasty movie. It takes you to some very dark places. The question is, are those places worth visiting? In the first 40 minutes, you get some mileage out of morbid curiosity and seeing Loomis's interactions with Michael. But in the last hour or so, it's basically like watching a Terminator in a Michael Myers mask killing people that you either don't care about or want to see dead. With the exception of Danny Trejo, his character was nothing but nice to Michael over the years. And Michael repays that by drowning him while Trejo shouts over and over, "I was good to you, Mikey." I genuinely felt bad for him, and it did a good job of showing just how sadistic Michael's become. Anyway, on to the sequel.
Early in Michael's time at Smith's Grove, his mother visits and gifts him a white toy horse. It reminds him of a dream he had where she, dressed all in white, walked down a white hallway with a white horse. 15 years later, after his encounter with Laurie left him riddled with bullets, Michael is taken to the hospital. On the way, the ambulance crashes and Michael escapes, apparently having survived that final shot from Laurie. Michael goes into hiding and the world presumes him dead. Over the next 2 years, Laurie heals physically but suffers anxiety and nightmares of Michael. Not helping matters is her friend and fellow survivor, Annie Brackett. Annie and her father took Laurie in and both mean well, but also serve as constant reminders of the trauma 2 years ago. Meanwhile, the other survivor, Dr. Loomis, has decided to profit off the events, giving press conferences, talks, and hyping his upcoming second book on Michael Myers, The Devil Walks Among Us. Throughout the book tour, Loomis is accused of profiteering and is even confronted by Linda's grieving father, who blames Loomis for letting this monster kill his daughter. On October 29th, Michael sees the image of his mother and his younger self. She reminds him that Halloween approaches. He must be ready. She adds, "We are counting on you to bring us home this year." His first victims are a father along with his son and daughter, a family whose farm Michael has been living on without permission. Then he eats their dog. Simultaneously, Laurie, a vegetarian, becomes ill and throws up, as though subconsciously experiencing her brother's meal. And that night, they share a dream. Laurie lies on a dinner table before personifications of Halloween. Young Michael tells his mother that he found Boo, the name he used to call his sister, and asks, "Are we going to be a family again?" His mother replies, "Not yet, Michael, not yet." On October 30th, Laurie hallucinates a recreation of the time Michael killed his stepfather. But this time, it's Laurie who wields the knife, and her friend Annie is the victim. Distraught by the vision, Laurie drowns herself in alcohol and further alienates herself from Annie. That night, Michael visits the Rabbit and Red Lounge, which proudly advertises that the mother of Michael Myers used to work there. He brutally murders the owner, along with a dancer and bouncer. The next day, Halloween, Michael's mother points out a billboard of Loomis and says, "He's still out there, rich and famous, all because of our pain. I hope he's having fun." Then, Michael heads into town. Meanwhile, Loomis releases his new book. In it, he reveals to the world that Laurie is Michael's sister, something she herself didn't even know. Brackett frantically calls home looking for her, but it's too late. Laurie already saw the truth for herself. Laurie parties her woes away with Mia and Harley, friends she recently made at a new job. Meanwhile, Loomis is humiliated on national TV. He appears on a talk show where David Newman, played by Chris Hardwick, and Weird Al as himself call him out for profiteering off the tragedy of Michael Myers. Loomis finally starts to realize how awful he's been. At the party, Harley meets a boy, before both are murdered by Michael. Meanwhile, a drunk Laurie starts to see the image of young Michael and their mother, someone Laurie doesn't even recognize. Seeing her distressed friend, Mia decides to take Laurie home to the Bracketts, a home where Annie is currently staying, protected by a deputy on her father's orders. Michael arrives before Laurie and easily kills the deputy, then severely wounds Annie, spraying the walls with her blood. Laurie finds her friend and cradles the girl as she bleeds to death. Meanwhile, Mia calls the police before she too is attacked. After a chase, Michael manages to grab Laurie and drag her into a cabin. Inside, she again sees the image of young Michael and their mother, Deborah, who demands Laurie repeat the words, "I love you, Mommy," over and over. The police arrive and surround the place. Loomis sees the reporting on TV and decides it's a chance to redeem himself. He heads to the scene and runs into the cabin, hoping to lure Michael out. Deborah nods to Michael, and he tackles Loomis through the cabin wall before shouting, "Die!" and stabbing him. Loomis gets himself stabbed, but successfully brought Michael out in the open, allowing the police to once again riddle him with bullets, this time enough to kill him. But it's not over. Laurie's mother leads the girl outside. She picks up Michael's knife and moves toward Loomis, as though to finish him off. The police don't give her a chance. She is shot and killed. Though, in her final moments, she sees herself in a white hallway. Her mother approaches with a white horse, just like the dream described by a young Michael Myers.
Rob Zombie's second Halloween movie is even darker and nastier than the first one. The first had a few strong characters we could root for, like Loomis and Laurie, but in the sequel, Loomis has been turned selfish and mostly irredeemable. Laurie is still a good person, but spends most of the movie descending into insanity, which is at best hard to watch, and at worst, not really believable. Also in this one, we spend some time inside Michael Myers' head, which is not a pleasant place to be for a few reasons. So this movie ups the awfulness while snuffing out most of the light, leading to that same question: are these dark places worth a visit? And considering how much darker they are, I'd say there's even more pressure on this one to deliver. Unfortunately, it doesn't. And as a result, this ranks as one of the worst Halloween movies. But it's not all bad. I actually liked much of the first act. First, you do have to get past another dose of Rob Zombie's patented "everyone is a complete piece of crap" routine, where a coroner makes lewd, necrophilic, not sure if that's a word, comments about Linda's corpse. In fact, these comments are what distract the driver, leading to the crash which frees Michael Myers. But once you're past that, we join Laurie Strode in the hospital. First, there's a gruesome scene of the surgeries necessary for her wounds. It's very graphic, which I actually appreciated. Characters often go through a lot in slasher movies, and their wounds go unacknowledged, other than maybe a limp or a broken arm. But Rob Zombie wants violence to be off-putting and taken seriously, so he gets up close and personal with Laurie's wounds, and the effects are very believable. Then, we're in the hospital with Laurie. The mood is set by the song "Nights in White Satin" by the Moody Blues, creating an unsettling and melancholy atmosphere. Things feel surreal when the hospital suddenly seems empty. Then, the reveal: Michael has arrived and killed much of the staff. As with the first Rob Zombie Halloween, some of the most thrilling sequences are when it's Michael chasing Laurie. This sequence is similarly intense, but even more nightmarish, thanks to the abandoned hospital vibe, the glowing red pile of bodies she falls on, and getting stuck in a tiny guardhouse with Michael just outside. And with Michael's longer hair draping over the edges of the mask, and the mask itself having taken some damage, he looks more like an inhuman monster than ever before. Things were moving too quickly for me to dwell on it, so the pile of bodies kind of passed me by, and I was like, what is that? Do some hospitals have red body piles instead of morgues? Then, of course, it's revealed that this is all a nightmare. Laurie is traumatized by the events of the first movie, which happened 2 years earlier. As a sort of standalone sequence, disconnected from the rest of the movie, I enjoyed this opening. From there, the movie essentially splits into 3 stories that occur in parallel, each focusing on a different character: Loomis, Laurie, and Michael. Each of the stories suffer some glaring flaws, which make them hard to get through. In Loomis's case, It starts with what feels like a betrayal of the character from the previous movie. Yes, there was a degree of selfishness in his writing a book about Michael and profiting off it, but it was played ambiguously enough that you couldn't tell if it was as greedy as people interpreted it. On top of that, we saw how he tried to reach Michael for years, and seemed genuinely heartbroken when he couldn't. Further, he risked his own life to help Laurie when Michael was after her. So by the end, he comes out on the side of flawed, but essentially trying to do good. The sequel jettisons that and turns him into a complete a-hole, sensationalizing Michael, taking interviews in front of the Myers house, and even outing Laurie as his sister. Now, even if you were to say, fine, let's ignore the first movie and just take this character as is, there could still be a self-contained arc in this movie where this new, selfish Loomis goes through a process of self-reflection to see what he's become and maybe change, which actually does happen. The problem is that we get there through tedious repetition. Scene after scene of Loomis being selfish and being told how selfish he is. Besides the one point where Linda's father shows up with a gun, there's no real escalation in these incidents. It's just one after another until suddenly Loomis realizes, I've been awful, it's time to change. In fact, the impetus seems to be his humiliation on national TV, which makes his turn at the end feel superficial. It's not a vengeful, grieving father that changes his mind, it's Weird Al Yankovic making fun of him. So there's no arc to speak of, it's just Loomis being selfish until suddenly he isn't because it's time for the movie's climax. As for Michael's story, it first suffers from some of the usual issues. He's killing a bunch of people we don't know or care about. But what's new here is that we get a peek inside his head. Throughout the movie, he either hallucinates or sees the ghost of his mother, and he communicates with her through his child self, where the young Michael stands in front of the current Michael. On the surface, these scenes, frankly, look cheesy. Beneath the surface, you find you're in shallow waters. There's just nothing interesting to be gleaned from this rare peek into the mind of Michael Myers. His mother vaguely promises that he needs to kill so they can be together. This is inexplicable. Why does he need to kill? What does it mean that Michael needs to bring them home? You might say, isn't Michael supposed to be a mystery? Well, he already was mysterious. Going into his mind to show us nonsense doesn't make him more mysterious. It just shows us stuff we don't need to see. Maybe there's a way this could have been done where we see something intriguing that feels like it has meaning to it, so we ponder. Kind of like pondering the nature of evil. But you don't get that feeling here. Especially when his mother will say something really straightforward and grounded. Like when she mentions Loomis and says, he's still out there, rich and famous, all because of our pain. I hope he's having fun. In that case, it's a very straightforward and human thing. Greedy guy is profiting off your misery. Go kill him. So if this ghost or hallucination can so easily be understood in one case, why is it so vague and nonsensical in the other? As to Laurie herself, like the newer Halloween movies, this one wants to explore how the trauma of Michael Myers affects her, mostly through her deteriorating friendship with Annie. The problem is that we don't see it deteriorate. We just see them already at each other's throats, and it's off-putting. Annie reassures Laurie, one day at a time, and Laurie blows up on her that she's sick of hearing that. The moment feels like it comes out of nowhere, because Annie seems entirely well-meaning. The thing is, it's easy to show two people mad at each other. What's harder, and what we needed to see but don't, is how two friends get to this point. Because in this scene, Laurie's outburst is one of many, and not unexpected for her or Annie. But for us, it's completely jarring, because we didn't see the decay of their friendship. The friendship continues to deteriorate throughout the movie, but continues to feel jarring because it's all tell rather than show, to the point where you almost want to laugh while you watch. There's one scene where Annie catches Laurie drinking a beer and freaks out, accusing her, "Oh, is this how your new work friends roll?" You get the idea they're alluding to, that Laurie is maybe drinking too much because of influence from her new friends, but we only see her sipping on one drink. If she had too much, we didn't see it. And if her new friends are a bad influence, we've seen no evidence of that either. So Annie's reaction feels completely overblown. And maybe it's supposed to be, but it comes so suddenly and so out of left field that it's almost comical. It reminded me of this scene from The Room.
What kind of drugs do you take?
It's nothing like that.
What the hell is wrong with you?
The movie also borrows the telepathic link concept from Halloween 5. Michael and Laurie are somehow metaphysically connected. They share a dream, she throws up when he eats a dog, they have that shared hallucination at the end. This aspect of the movie is strange, and I'm unsure what purpose it serves. Maybe it's meant to be a metaphor to explore how one person's evil might affect another, or how mental illness can run in the family, and somehow Michael triggers something in Laurie that drives her to pick up the knife. But we never see Laurie fight against the shared consciousness or acknowledge it. It just happens to her. So as an idea, nothing is explored. It's just brought up. Or maybe the whole thing is just meant to be interesting. The problem is, it's not. It feels like a half-baked idea that's just there for the sudden Laurie picks up the knife twist at the end, similar to the ending of Halloween 4. Also, when Michael is getting riddled with bullets, he's not wearing the mask. So it looks really cheesy. Just a big guy with a big beard grimacing and kind of shimmying his shoulders. And adult Michael speaks in this movie, or at least in the director's cut he does. For the first time ever on screen, adult Michael Myers speaks. He says, "Die!" as he stabs Loomis. So there you go. Okay, I think we can wrap this one up. Well, what the hell am I supposed to do now? Somehow I need to get back to Earth. I've got to come back to life. But how do you do that? Wait a minute. Michael Myers comes back to life all the time. At the end of H2O, he got his head cut off and he was back in Resurrection thanks to a retcon. That's it! If a major Hollywood production can do a retcon, surely I can too. Let's see, when Daniel killed me, I was off screen. Maybe his didn't kill me at all. Maybe when he swung his knife, I dodged it.
Can't believe that worked. I'm alive again. Hello?
Congratulations.
Who is this?
You don't recognize my voice?
No.
Seriously?
No?
It's Al, the guy who sold you the tapes.
Oh yeah, thank you.
Look at your wrist. Calm down. It's not that big of a deal. Just go finish your little movie reviews and then we'll talk. That is, if you want to know the truth.
The truth? What do you mean?
Just do the reviews. This video is long enough already.
Okay, I'm going. Jeez.
These final three are a rare case in the franchise where one creative team oversaw multiple films as part of a singular vision. So we're going to watch all three in a row and discuss each in the full context of a trilogy. Just like Halloween H2O pretended Halloween 4 through 6 didn't happen, this one pretends nothing after the first movie happened. So this is a direct sequel to the 1978 original. 40 years have passed since Laurie Strode's Night of Terror. In the time since, she's become a recluse, turning her home into an impregnable fortress, arming herself, and awaiting Michael's inevitable return. She's also inflicted that paranoia on her daughter, Karen, training the girl to fight from a young age, until social services took her away. Now they are estranged, though Laurie tries to remain close with her granddaughter, Allison. Michael, in the meantime, remains at Smith's Grove, under the watchful eye of Dr. Sartain, Loomis's predecessor, before Michael is transferred to Glass Hill, described by Sartain as the pit of hell. A couple of podcasters visit. They show Michael his old mask and hope to provoke a response, but get nothing. Next, they visit Laurie,
but she only chides them for treating Michael as a human to be understood rather than what he really is, pure evil, the boogeyman. The night of Michael's transfer, Laurie watches the bus leave with a gun in one hand and a drink in the other. Then she makes a surprise appearance at her family's dinner, where Karen and her husband Ray meet their daughter's boyfriend Cameron for the first time. It doesn't go well. Despite Karen's insistence, Laurie just can't let her paranoia go. And she's right to worry. Michael's bus left Smith's Grove, but never made it to Glass Hill. A father and son find it crashed in a ditch, with patients wandering freely, including Michael. He makes short work of the father and son. Deputy Frank Hawkins arrives later to find a wounded Dr. Sartain on the bus. Frank will soon learn that he's about to have his second run-in with Michael Myers. The first was 40 years earlier, when he stopped Loomis from killing the monster. The next day, Halloween, Myers procures some coveralls by killing a mechanic, then kills the podcasters to reclaim his mask. Laurie hears of the escape and demands her family join her in preparing for the inevitable confrontation, but Karen kicks her out. To her, it's just more paranoia from her crazy mother. Halloween night arrives, and the Shape kills. First, a woman with a hammer from her garage. Then, he takes her knife and kills her neighbor. Meanwhile, Allison heads to the school Halloween dance while her friend Vicky is stuck babysitting. Fortunately, her boyfriend shows up to keep her company. Unfortunately, Michael hasn't lost his taste for babysitters and their boyfriends. Both end up dead. At the dance, Allison spots Cameron kissing another girl. They fight and she leaves with their mutual friend Oscar, though ends up walking alone after he makes an awkward pass at her. Meanwhile, Hawkins arrives on the scene to find Vicky and her boyfriend's bodies. So does Laurie, prompted by the police scanner she's been listening to. She manages to put a bullet in Michael's shoulder, but he ultimately evades capture, and soon finds his next victim, Allison's friend Oscar. She is drawn by his screams for help, but only finds his mangled corpse and Michael. She runs for help and is soon picked up by Frank and a now recovered Dr. Sartain. The sheriff insisted the doctor join Frank as an expert on the case. That turned out to be a mistake. With Allison in the back seat, they spot Michael. Frank crashes into him and prepares to fire a finishing blow until Sartain stops him, stabbing Frank in the neck. The doctor has become obsessed with the idea of understanding Michael and doesn't want him to die. He even tries on the mask before throwing Michael in the back seat with Allison. He hopes to reunite the monster with Laurie. But Allison tantalizes him with a lie. Michael spoke to her. She'll tell the doctor what he said if he lets her go. Sartain pulls over. Michael, now recovered from the crash, uses the opportunity to escape. While he kills the doctor, Allison runs into the woods. Meanwhile, Laurie hunkers down at her place with Karen and Ray. Just as Laurie hoped, Michael soon arrives. Before Laurie spots him, the Shape kills Ray. Laurie sends Karen to her underground bunker while she herself takes on Michael. They struggle, but she manages to blow off 2 of his fingers with a shotgun. Soon, Allison arrives and joins Karen downstairs, while Laurie stays on the surface to fight. Michael incapacitates her and breaks his way into the bunker, but Karen is ready. She shoots him with her childhood rifle as a recovered Laurie steps out of the shadows and knocks him into the bunker. He grabs Karen's leg as they escape, but Allison stabs him, knocking him back down. Karen pulls a lever to trap Michael, and Laurie opens some valves to release gas. Finally, she drops a flare to incinerate the room with Michael in it. Outside, they flag down a truck and leave, while the house burns behind them. Halloween Kills takes place right where 2018 left off. Michael, of course, survives the fire and is inadvertently freed by a squad of firefighters, whom he easily slaughters. Meanwhile, Cameron leaves the school dance and finds Frank Hawkins bleeding on the road. He needs to die, Frank says, and thinks of Halloween night, 1978, the night he shot a bullet through his partner's neck hoping to kill Michael. After that, Frank couldn't take any more bloodshed, so when Loomis held a gun to Michael, Frank did something he's regretted to this day. He stopped him. Instead, Michael was taken into custody, and 40 years later, it led to this. Michael's first stop is a house near Laurie's where he attacks an old couple, killing the man and leaving the woman severely wounded. Elsewhere in town, Laurie, Karen, and Allison are taken to the hospital. Meanwhile, some old friends gather at a bar, like they do every Halloween. Marion, the nurse who accompanied Loomis to pick up Michael in 1978. Tommy Doyle and Lindsay Wallace, the kids who were babysat by Laurie Strode. And Lonnie, a kid who tried to enter the Myers house on a dare, but was scared off by Loomis, before running into Myers himself later that night. Lonnie runs off when he hears from his son Cameron, who is with police after finding Hawkins. And at the bar, the group sees a news report about the night's murders and about the escaped patients from Smith's Grove. They assume Michael is on the loose. In her car, a girl dressed as a nurse thinks she spots Michael, not realizing it's the other escaped patient, Anthony Tivoli. The man drives off, but already a mob led by Tommy is forming to chase down who they mistakenly think is Michael. At the hospital, Allison and Karen are shocked to learn Michael is still alive, though they keep this fact from Laurie. Against Karen's wishes, Allison joins Tommy's mob, arming herself from Lonnie's stash of guns. They split into groups to cover more ground and recruit more people for their cause. Lindsay, Marion, and the doctor and nurse find Michael at a playground, where he's already beheaded a child. Michael kills them all, except for Lindsay, who manages to escape. Back at the hospital, Frank is wheeled into the same room as Laurie. The two reminisce about old times and a romance between them, which almost happened but never did. At the time, Laurie was sweet on Ben Tramer. Tommy brings Lindsay to the hospital, which is devolving into chaos as victims' families arrive. He quickly rallies the crowd to be on the lookout for Michael. "Evil dies tonight," they begin to chant. Soon, Anthony Tivoli arrives seeking help, but he's quickly mistaken for Michael Myers. The crowd chases him. Karen knows it's a mistake and tries to help, but he's already cornered and lost hope. Anthony jumps off the building to his death. They realize he's the wrong guy, and hospital security guard, once sheriff, Lee Brackett, observes, "Now he's turning us into monsters." Meanwhile, the real Michael Myers has gone to his childhood home and murdered the couple who live there, Big John and Little John. And soon, Lonnie realizes that's where they should head. Checking Michael's kills on a map, they all lead straight to the Myers house. Lonnie leaves his son in the car with Allison, then heads into the house, and is quickly killed, though he manages to discharge his weapon first. Hearing the gunshot, Allison and Cameron head in after him. Michael throws Allison down some stairs and slams Cameron's neck back and forth through the railing, before giving it a final, lethal twist. As he approaches Allison, Karen arrives to the rescue, impaling Michael in the back with a pitchfork, then stomps his head. She takes his mask and he goes after it, so she leads him right to the mob. Michael is shot, stabbed, and beaten. While at the hospital, Laurie and Frank discuss the nature of Michael's evil, how each kill makes him stronger. Michael gets up and kills everyone around him, including Tommy. When the police arrive, Karen looks up at the Myers house, at Judith's window, the one Michael used to stare out as a child. She heads inside to stare out that window herself, not realizing Michael is in the house. He stabs her again and again, until she's dead. 1 year later, on Halloween night, 21-year-old Corey Cunningham babysits a boy named Jeremy. Things go okay until Jeremy decides to play a prank, tricking Corey into thinking Michael Myers is there before locking him in the attic. Driven to panic as the boy's parents arrive, Corey kicks the door open, inadvertently hitting Jeremy, sending him flying off the balcony to his death. Jeremy's parents scream in horror. 3 years later, Corey has become a town pariah. Meanwhile, Laurie has tried to move on from her trauma, even celebrating Halloween with her granddaughter and writing a book about her experiences. One day, Corey's approached by some high school bullies demanding he buy them alcohol. When he refuses, they recognize him as the child killer. Corey tenses his grip on a glass bottle and it shatters in his hand. They push him to the ground until Lori spots them. After they leave, Lori suggests they slash their tires in retaliation, and she decides to play Cupid. She brings Corey to the doctor's office for his hand and to meet Allison, who works there. The attraction between them is immediate. That night, she texts him about a costume party, and texting at the table brings on the wrath of Corey's overbearing mother. She even denies him the usual custard dessert. The next day, Allison visits Corey at his stepfather's salvage yard where he works. Love is in the air, and not just for these two, but also Lori and Frank. The two bump into each other at the grocery store. After surviving Halloween 2018, Frank has a new lease on life. He's been learning to play guitar and speak Japanese. One day, he'd like to fly over there and see the cherry blossoms. She leaves with a smile, drawing the ire of a woman whose sister was widowed and made mute by Michael's assault. She blames Lori for provoking the boogeyman. At the costume party, things go well, until Corey bumps into the mother of the boy he killed. He leaves, and Allison goes after him, assuring that she knows what it's like to have people look at you and think they know you. He points out that people see a survivor in her, but a monster in him. He storms off and bumps into the bullies. Things escalate quickly, ending with Corey pushed off a bridge, landing next to a sewer pipe, where Michael has been hiding. He drags the boy inside, but after looking into his eyes and seeing something, he lets Corey go. Outside, a homeless man tells him that Michael often drags people in and kills them. He asks why the killer let Corey go, then threateningly pulls a knife. In the struggle, Corey kills the man. He pays the Strodes a visit to apologize to Allison, but Lori quickly sees something has changed in him. That night, he and Allison reconnect over dinner. They talk about wanting to burn Haddonfield and leave, until they're interrupted by Allison's boisterous ex. Corey insists he leave them alone, and when he doesn't, he stands threateningly. The man backs down, until that night, after Corey's dropped off Allison, he confronts him alone. Corey lures him into the sewer and holds him while Michael stabs him to death. Then Corey returns to Allison, and Lori watches with concern as the two head upstairs. He spends the night with her. The next day, Lori visits Lindsay at a bar and tells her what she's seen in Corey's eyes, the same thing she saw in Michael's. She speaks with the father of the boy he killed. He thought Corey was a good kid and believed it was an accident, but when he saw Corey yesterday, he also saw darkness. He wonders if the town did this to Corey by the way they treated him after the accident, or if it was always there. That night, Corey and Michael kill together. Their victims are the doctor Allison works for and a nurse who was unfairly promoted over her. Corey feels himself growing stronger, and later he gets closer with Allison, suggesting they should leave Haddonfield. They hang out on top of the radio station where Willie the Kid broadcasts from. He finds them and is quick to provoke, telling Allison what really happened with Lori and Michael. She teased a man with brain damage, and he snapped. Pushed over the edge, Allison agrees with Corey. They should leave Haddonfield together. The next day is Halloween. Lori visits Corey and tells him to stay away from Allison. He responds with a promise. If he can't have her, no one will. Enraged, he visits Michael in the sewers and takes his mask. Allison packs to leave town while Lori tries to talk her out of it. She sees in Corey what she saw in Michael, but Allison doesn't believe her. Halloween night arrives. Wearing Michael's mask, Corey murders the bullies and his stepfather is killed in the crossfire. Next, he kills his mother, and after that, Willie the Kid, removing the man's tongue just before he dies. Finally, he visits Lori. She calls the police to report her own suicide, then discharges her weapon, tricking Corey into thinking she's dead and he's safe, just before she shoots him. As Allison walks into the house, the wounded Corey jams a knife into his own throat, framing Lori as a killer, hoping to turn Allison against her grandmother. And it works. Allison leaves until she gets a call from Frank, telling her about the suicide call. Meanwhile at the house, Michael has arrived. He finds Corey still barely alive, but puts him out of his misery. Then he turns his attention to Lori. The two nearly kill each other until Allison returns to ensure their victory. Finally, Michael is dead, and to make sure the legend dies with his body, the corpse is paraded through town and fed into an industrial shredder. In the days that follow, Laurie reconciles with Allison and attempts to move on, perhaps with the help of Frank, who pays her a visit. They sit on the front porch and ponder a brighter future.
Creating a Halloween sequel is an immense challenge. Think of the balancing act it requires. The audience wants to see more Michael Myers, but you can't explore his character any further. Giving him motivation, backstory, or specific limits on his abilities ruins the enigma and violates the original's principles. You also don't want to make Michael blatantly supernatural, but you need him to mostly win against his victims, so he has to have the element of surprise on his side, to explain why he can so easily kill without the authorities easily stopping him with enough firepower. That basically leaves only one option for Michael. He has to escape Smith's Grove or come back from people thinking he's dead and kill unsuspecting victims before the authorities are aware of him. Because once they know he's out there, it's hard to keep it believable that at least one of them wouldn't put enough bullets in his brain to make sure he's either dead or irrefutably supernatural. That doesn't leave a lot of options. So how do you do all that without just repeating the original? For this trilogy, the filmmakers found their answer in thinking about what Michael Myers represents: evil. The original primarily used that idea to inspire fear. Evil was there to chase us. But it didn't spend a lot of time using Michael as a metaphor to actually explore the idea of evil. This new trilogy does exactly that, by exploring his effect on the people around him. That's the balancing act. Michael can keep doing what he's doing, essentially repeating exactly what we saw 40 years ago, and that's okay, because what matters is what everyone else is doing in response. And there, the writers have a lot more freedom than with Michael himself. Halloween 2018 focused on how the trauma of encountering evil can affect someone and how those effects ripple through the generations, passed down from a mother to her daughter and then to her granddaughter. Halloween Kills broadens the scope to see how a community responds to evil, and how that response can sometimes be more dangerous than the evil itself. Finally, Halloween Ends focuses on what drives someone to embrace evil. That should be sacred ground in a Halloween movie because it sounds a little too close to exploring Michael Myers' motivation, but the movie conveniently introduces a new character to see what drives him to Michael, the personification of evil. Each movie accomplishes this to varying degrees of success. The one that most succeeds, in my opinion, is probably the first. Jamie Lee Curtis, Judy Greer, and Andy Matichak all do great jobs portraying 3 generations of the Strode family. Laurie has been turned into a paranoid, alcoholic agoraphobe, unable to enjoy life because she knows the horrors that await her outside. Inflicting this on her daughter Karen turned the girl against her mother, resenting her for depriving her a normal life. And finally, Karen's daughter is caught in the middle, wanting Laurie to change and resenting her own mother for keeping her from Laurie. It's a complicated trio of relationships, ripe for dramatic tension, which the movie definitely minds. I would say it's often a little too unsubtle. For example, I would imagine it'd be very difficult for someone to confront their own grandmother and shout some hard truths at them. Allison does this to Laurie early on in the film, demanding she move on from Michael Myers, pointing out how her paranoia took priority over her own family, how it cost her a relationship with her daughter, etc. The scene is played dramatically, but it's not very effective. To feel something, you have to feel moved, almost literally, moved from one state to another. You have to start with tension bubbling under the surface. Then it grows, and finally it releases in a dramatic confrontation like this one. But here, we're joining the story when the tension has already bubbled over. So, rather than feeling anything, it's more like getting a status report on the Strode family. They aren't doing well, and we learn why, thanks to exposition from encounters like this one. Allison tells us Laurie prioritized her fear of Michael over her family. Laurie tells us, if the way I raised your mother means that she hates me, but that she's prepared for the horrors of this world, then I can live with that. And Allison responds, say goodbye to Michael and get over it. It's unsubtle, but the performances somewhat make up for it, especially Jamie Lee Curtis. For example, when she loses control at the dinner after watching Michael's transfer from Smith's Grove, it's difficult to watch her break down. She wants to be with her family but can't, because she believes that letting Michael go means being unprepared, which means putting her and her family at risk. This introduces another balancing act for the movie. If Laurie has been preparing for Michael's return with weapons and defenses, how do you stay in a horror movie and not turn into an action movie? The answer? By letting Michael Myers do his thing for a while with unsuspecting victims before finally colliding with Laurie Strode. Showing Michael Myers in all his glory is something this movie does well. For the first time since Halloween, Michael Myers feels like Michael Myers. He moves right, something between human, alien, and robot. He kills right, first stalking his victims, who we get to know a little bit before he kills them, allowing for anticipation and suspense. And it's all to John Carpenter's score, who finally returned to the franchise. We get a brand new soundtrack, of course bringing back the old theme, but also updating it and adding a whole lot more. The atmosphere is back in both the music and visuals, which in some ways even improves on the original. Like the sequence where Michael finally heads into town. I love when the camera creeps around him to show children trick-or-treating, and Haddonfield decked out for Halloween. As much as I appreciate the scenes of fall in the original, with colorful leaves and some pumpkins, it did feel strangely lacking in Halloween decorations. This more than makes up for it. For a moment, the screen is filled with a real snapshot of suburban Halloween, and it leads into that great sequence when, in one continuous take, Michael murders a woman with her own hammer, trades it for a knife, then pays her neighbor a visit. Or the overturned bus sequence. I love the darkness, limited visibility, and the way it allows them to play with light, like how Hawkins looks red here in the background. Or when Oscar encounters Michael and there's that great use of the motion detecting lights. This movie knows how to use cinematography and darkness to amp up Michael's kills, and I really appreciated that. My one complaint, and this is definitely subjective, is that most of the kills are injected with humor that is very today, in the same way that Halloween H2O feels very late 90s. Like, before Michael kills the father and son, the two argue because the boy doesn't want to go on so many hunting trips. He wants to dance more. Clearly meant to violate the stereotype that a boy should be more into hunting than dancing. Or Julian, the boy Vicky babysits, the way he curses and talks like an adult. I personally find the humor distracting and sometimes reality breaking. Like with Julian, any child who just watched the boogeyman murder his favorite babysitter right in front of him would be a mess of tears. Instead, he looks and says, "Nope," and runs away. I'm not saying I want to see a traumatized child, but I guess I am saying that sometimes the situation calls for it. And there's more 2018 humor, like the two cops discussing banh mi sandwiches, or when they tell Sartain to sit still, and he says, "I was sitting still anyway, what do you mean?" Anyway, mileage will vary, but for me personally, Halloween isn't a movie where I want a lot of jokes. Another balancing act this movie pulls off is that obviously we're building up to a confrontation between Laurie and Michael, but that violates the character, doesn't it? Michael shouldn't particularly care about Laurie because that would tell us something about him, that he holds a grudge or is particularly drawn to her for some reason. You gotta remember, this movie erases Halloween II from existence, so they aren't brother and sister here. In fact, the movie makes fun of that at one point when someone brings it up as a rumor, which isn't true. So to get around it, they introduce Dr. Sartain, someone so obsessed with Michael Myers, it drove him mad. He's the one who brings Michael to Laurie, hoping the reunion will provoke a response in him. That could work, but I never got sold on it. To try and unite Michael with Laurie, to kill in the hopes of feeling what Michael felt, and to even put on his mask thinking it would tell you something about what it's like to be Michael, is a level of insanity that is hard to accept. For me, it felt like one of those awful twists that comes out of nowhere and lands with a thud. I'm not sure how they could have pulled it off. Maybe I needed more signs of Sartain's instability earlier on, or I needed to see what he found so fascinating about Michael that he would go to such lengths to understand him. It also somewhat holds back the themes of the movie. One of the ways Laurie suffers from evil is the paranoia it's caused. She believes Michael is coming after her, and it seems she's wrong. Without Sartain's intervention, it seems Michael wouldn't have gone out of his way for Laurie, or at least the movie leaves it ambiguous. Wouldn't it have been interesting if Laurie's paranoia is what caused her family to collide with Michael? For example, if rather than wait for him, she went on the hunt and created the confrontation. Instead, Dr. Sartain essentially proves her right. She's wrong that Michael would choose to come after her, but the bottom line is that he did come for her, just not for the reasons she expected. This creates a sort of escape hatch for the Laurie character, where we can see her paranoia as a problem for her and her family, but we don't hate her for it, because it ended up saving their lives. All that aside, the final confrontation was thrilling to watch, and I enjoyed the callbacks to the original. Like, this time, instead of Michael falling and disappearing, Laurie falls and he's the one surprised to see she's gone. I will say though, the Laurie we met in this movie, do you think that she would walk away from Michael without seeing a bona fide corpse? I think Laurie would have looked down at Michael in those flames and put a few more bullets in his head before leaving. And if she didn't get the chance, she wouldn't believe he was really dead until she saw him in the morgue and the dental records to prove it was him. Either way, overall, solid entry in the Halloween franchise. It brought back a lot of what we liked in the original, updated for modern times, while introducing some new things. Halloween Kills brings back a lot of what worked in 2018. Michael still walks and acts like Michael. There's still a great score and good cinematography, but this time, the movie tried to pull off another balancing act, and I'd say they fell. There are essentially two movies happening at the same time. One is an exploitation movie pushing Michael Myers to his limits, reveling in how much violence he can dish out and how much he can take. The other is an exploration of how his evil affects the town of Haddonfield, leading to mob rule. The problem with the exploitation movie is that it's filled with characters we really don't know or care about. Like the first Halloween 2, Laurie is mostly sidelined in favor of some other characters. But at least this time there was hope, because they weren't just random hospital workers. They were returning characters, and in some cases, cast members. We get Marion, the nurse who accompanied Loomis, who previously made her return in H2O, Tommy and Lindsay, the boy and girl babysat by Laurie, Lonnie, who appeared briefly in the original, approaching the Myers house on a dare before Loomis scared him off, and even Lee Brackett. The problem with these characters is that although we know of them, we don't really know them. They were mostly minor characters in the original, so we didn't learn much about them, and even if we did, most were children, so 40 years later, they're entirely different people. The previous installment gave us a window into Laurie, Karen, and Allison's lives before setting them on a collision course with Myers. Kills makes no attempt to do the same with these characters. Instead, it seems like it wants to coast on, hey, remember them? They were in the old movies, and now they're back. It also feels a little like they're scraping the bottom of the barrel in search for returning characters. Like, I get Lindsay and Tommy feeling a bit traumatized. They came face to face with Michael and were in real danger. Lonnie, on the other hand, saw him. He just saw him. And even that didn't happen in the original. It was a retcon saying he bumped into the killer after the events of the first movie. It's also just really frustrating to watch how much these characters bungle the process. Like Marion in the car with the doctor and nurse character, who honestly feel pretty randomly added to the proceedings. Marion tries to shoot Michael, but can't hit him once, and embarrassingly tries to sound like an action hero, saying, "This is for Dr. Loomis," before realizing she's out of ammo and getting herself killed. The guy, dressed as a doctor, tries to strangle Michael with a stethoscope. Yeah, that doesn't work. And the girl also can't hit a target a few feet in front of her and accidentally shoots herself in the face. The problem is that the movie can't let Michael get shot too much or it crosses into explicitly supernatural territory, where it's no longer believable. So if it's Michael versus a gun, the character holding the gun has to be portrayed as ineffective and incompetent so Michael can get away. Also, the girl shooting herself is an example of the exploitation aspect. It's a pretty absurd way to die. Michael kicks a door into her hand, flipping the gun toward her face. The problem is that it's exploitation without being fun. And I'm not saying I want a fun Halloween movie, but without fun, exploitation doesn't really work. Instead, it comes off as silliness in a movie whose tone is serious and ends up eliciting more eye rolls than laughs. The other movie, the one trying to explore the theme of mob rule, mainly fails for how unsubtle it is and how illogical it is. For example, Tommy Doyle presents himself as intimately familiar with Michael Myers. He tells everyone about the boogeyman and nominates himself as their leader against the monster. Yet, he's as surprised as everyone else to learn this man is not Michael Myers. He even has the audacity to ask, "How do we know it's not him? He always wears a mask." Is the movie really trying to tell us that Michael's face is secret? Because in the previous movie, these two podcasters had no trouble getting within a few feet of an unmasked Michael Myers. At the bar, we even see a news report about the two escaped patients from Smith's Grove. The faces are blurred out for us because they're in the background, but you can tell that for the characters in the movie, they're close-up photos. They aren't snapshots taken of escapees on the run, so the photos must have come from official sources. So wouldn't they be identified on the news? Especially if one of them was a notorious serial killer. Instead, we're meant to believe that the two faces were shown without names, so no one knows which one of the two is Michael Myers. And for some reason, when they see Anthony Tivoli, they assume he's Michael Myers, even though, obviously, he's not. And if Tommy were really as obsessed with Michael as he's portrayed here, are we really meant to believe that in the last 40 years, he didn't once think, I wonder what Michael Myers looks like? If two podcasters can easily find out, and his photo can end up on the news, it just doesn't feel that hard to find out what his face looks like. In terms of lack of subtlety, this movie and Halloween 2018 both have this annoying thing where characters will say something clearly for the purpose of setting up a line that the writers thought sounded cool. In 2018, when they head down to Laurie's bunker, she says to Karen, "I know you thought this was my cage." A few minutes later, Allison joins Karen and says, "I'm locked in a cage." And finally, the haymaker. Once they trap Michael down there, Karen says to her daughter, "It's not a cage, baby, it's a trap." First off, a cage is really similar to a trap. Like, you do trap animals in a cage. Second, you can just feel the script getting every character to say the word cage so they can set up that punchline. It's a minor gripe in that movie, but things get worse in Kills. Before Tommy heads out to hunt Michael with a baseball bat, he puts some money in the tip jar and says, "Love lives today." And Marion says, "But evil dies tonight." It's a cheesy line, and not the kind of thing someone would really think of spur of the moment unless they were trying to sound cool. It sounds like Marion thought of the line earlier and was just waiting for the right moment to say it. As soon as Tommy said, "Love lives today," she was like, "This is my chance, evil dies tonight." You roll your eyes and you move on, but then everyone starts chanting it, and it's awful. I don't hate the idea of using Michael as a way to explore mob rule. I actually think it's an appropriate theme if you're exploring the effects of evil. But every step of the way in this movie, it's executed just too over the top, and the characters are too stupid. Like the idea that Lonnie would take his son Cameron and Allison hunting for a serial killer. At one point, they figure out where Michael went. Shockingly, his childhood home. To be honest, it comes off as silly because we've seen it 10 times before. Like, obviously that's where he went. But you have to remember, in this continuity, Michael only went home once, so it's not too absurd it's taken some time to figure that out. Anyway, once they pinpoint his location, Lonnie decides to go in by himself and just immediately dies, almost comically fast. If this were a pure exploitation movie, you could laugh at it, but in a movie taking itself seriously, you just shake your head. Why would Lonnie think he could take on Michael alone? Especially in Michael's home territory where he knows the layout and he can use the thing he always uses. Surprise. Lonnie essentially committed suicide, knowing that Cameron would definitely go in after him and also get killed, which he does. So Lonnie comes off as one of the worst fathers ever, besides maybe Michael Myers himself in Halloween 6. Maybe there's a version of the story where we get to know Lonnie a little more and understand what would drive him to such self-destructive behavior, but this isn't it. Anyway, let's talk about the ending. This movie and 2018 do a decent job of skirting the supernatural line where Michael thrives. He takes a lot of damage and survives. It's probably unrealistic, but the movies don't push it too far. Then, like the original, Michael does something at the end of Halloween Kills which may step over that line. He is shot, stabbed, and beaten down by the mob until he gets back up, seemingly unscathed. I might have been okay with the ending if it was left at that, but it's confusingly cut together with a conversation between Laurie and Frank, where they talk about how Michael ascends and grows stronger with each kill. At first, it sounds like they are explicitly saying Michael isn't human. Laurie says, "I always thought Michael Myers was flesh and blood, just like you and me, but a mortal man could not have survived what he's lived through. The more he kills, the more he transcends into something else, impossible to defeat." Then they sort of bend it into a metaphor instead, where they clarify that the more he kills, the more fear he instills. So by growing stronger, they just mean he makes us more afraid, leading to things like mob rule and distrust. But then Frank says, "If only we knew then what we know now," which really sounds like the sort of thing you'd say if you learned a specific fact about Michael. Not that you've come to some philosophical realization about what fear does to people. The original got close to the supernatural line by having Michael walk away after taking 6 shots from Loomis. This one amped it up, plus added the dialogue, so it got a little too close while at the same time being confusing, so it was just odd and I wasn't a fan. It also feels like they were setting up for a sequel that didn't happen. There are odd moments, like when Allison gives Laurie the knife she used to stab Michael in the previous movie, saying, "This is for you, whenever you need it." Like they're setting up for her to use that knife at some point, but she never does. Then, of course, at the way end, Karen heads into Michael's house and gets herself killed. This franchise often has a problem with not mourning its characters. But after Laurie's trauma in 2018, and then spending 2 movies between her and her daughter, I thought there was no way they'd kill Karen and leave it at that. But Halloween Ends skips ahead 4 years, meaning we skip Allison and Laurie finding out about her death, we skip their initial grief, and in my opinion, didn't see anywhere near enough acknowledgement of her death. In retrospect, it makes it feel like a cheap, shocking way to end kills with some gravity after so many kills we didn't care about. Before we move on to Ends, I do want to be fair and point out a few things I enjoyed from Kills. As much as I didn't enjoy the payoff, it was fun to see them bring the old characters back, and it was cool to see the flashbacks to 1978. They did a good job of giving it a similar look and feel to the original movie. Plus, I thought they had Loomis return in a respectful way. It wasn't a large role, and it wasn't a distracting deepfake. It was just someone made up to look like him doing an impression for a brief appearance. There is also a visceral thrill to watching Michael kill. Those are the moments when you get caught up in the exploitation aspect and just out of morbid curiosity want to see what he's capable of and just how much damage he can take before getting back up. Also, in terms of moving the way Michael should move, one moment that stuck with me in this one, when he stabs multiple knives into the old man, one at a time, like a robot testing them until he finds the one he likes. Just really creepy and brutal. Finally, although Laurie is mostly sidelined, I enjoyed her interactions and flirtation with Frank Hawkins. He's a character I really like, and they did a good job of making him feel like a part of Halloween's history, even though he was invented for the new movies. It was also just nice to see a glimmer of positivity in Laurie's life. With that, let's talk about the controversial conclusion, Halloween Ends. I'll rip the band-aid off up front by saying I did not hate this movie. In fact, I sort of liked it, though it definitely has issues. The chief complaint I've seen is that it takes a sharp left turn and becomes something totally different from what came before. Michael is not in it very much, and instead of Laurie or Allison, the movie mainly focused on a kid named Corey, a kid who easily seems to manhandle Michael Myers. But after waiting through 12 Halloween movies, I have to say, I think it's impossible to stay true to the character of Michael Myers without becoming totally redundant. Like I laid out before, all Michael can do is brutally kill unsuspecting victims while taking above normal damage. But once he's made his return, where do you go from there? His rampage can only continue until enough authorities and manpower arrive that his survival is no longer believable. Then what do? The only option is to have people think they killed him but really he got away, or have him locked up again so he can disappear until things calm down. Over time, people become complacent and he can once again return to kill unsuspecting victims, which we've already seen so many times before, including at the start of this very trilogy. Do we really need to see that again? Personally, I've been ready for something different, so I was excited that Halloween Ends was at least trying to give us something new. And with its opening frames, it did exactly that. The entire cold open, I was wondering, where are they going with this? Is Michael going to jump out of the shadows and make his grand return 1 year after the events of Kills? And they know you're expecting it, so they lean into it, telegraphing Michael's return. First, they have a little fun with moments like this, where Corey thinks about grabbing a beer, which would seal his fate, turning him into one of the delinquents often the first to go in slashers. But he puts it down. Suddenly, the child is missing. It seems someone is in the house. The knife is gone. The kid screams. Then, the reveal. It's just a prank from the kid. But the fear spread by Michael hasn't left Haddonfield. It drives Corey to panic, and he makes a grave error, inadvertently killing the child he was meant to babysit. I was not expecting that, and in that moment, the movie had me gripped. And after that, it continued to hold my attention. I've said a few times that horror is at its best when it invades a space we've already connected with, thanks to characters with their own stories. Corey definitely has his own story, and it's one that's attention-grabbing because it's novel. How often do you watch a guilt-ridden, accidental child killer trying to get by? By the way, I haven't commented on it yet, but I love the opening credits in the original Halloween. The jack-o'-lantern with John Carpenter's theme is so effective in setting the mood. And I love how the new trilogy pays homage, but also turns the jack-o'-lanterns into metaphors for each movie. In 2018, we see a jack-o'-lantern inflating, because it's all about the return of evil. It's re-inflating. In Kills, we see a bunch of flaming jack-o'-lanterns because it's all about how evil spreads through mob rule. And finally, in Ends, we see jack-o'-lanterns getting born out of other jack-o'-lanterns because it's all about how evil is reborn, how it never goes away, but just changes shape. Also, the font and colors used for the titles and credits for 2018 Kills and Ends correspond to the same styles used for the original 1, 2, and 3, respectively. After the opening credits, we see some of the same issues return, namely a lack of subtlety. Laurie is writing a book, which allows for some narration throughout the movie, including cheesy lines which explain all the subtext. Like here, where Laurie is recapping everything that happened, including the first time Michael got caught. As he was locked away in his prison, I disappeared into mine. But the overall story does work for me. I felt bad for Corey getting picked on, I wanted to see him put his life back together, and I bought that Laurie would feel a kindred spirit with him. Both experienced unusual violence, and both have been outcasts. One aspect of this story that only half worked for me is the way people seem to blame Laurie for all the carnage caused by Michael. It seems to build off the idea that Michael wasn't actually targeting Laurie in 2018. Instead, it was a self-fulfilling prophecy. By preparing for the inevitable showdown, Laurie wished it into existence. But we all saw what happened. Whether Laurie prepared or not, Sartain is the one who arranged for the battle. Anyway, you can assume the public doesn't know much about Dr. Sartain, and if all they know is that Laurie was a gun-crazy recluse, hoping Michael would return so she could fight him, you can imagine how they'd get the idea his getting out and his fighting back would be partially her fault. You can kind of get there. Anyway, How much you enjoy this movie will in large part depend on how much you buy into the Corey story. And as I've already indicated, I totally did, at least for the first half. Like the dance scene. After watching him be so reserved and afraid for half an hour, it felt great to see him cut loose and have a good time with Allison. Then you see the mother of the boy he killed, and it all comes to a screeching halt. I felt it, his guilt and loneliness. Then I felt his anger when the bullies kick him while he's down. Corey goes a step too far, pulling out a knife, but given their threats and what he's been through, I bought it and to some degree sympathized with it. Then the movie takes a leap, and you either go with it or you don't. Corey meets Michael Myers. The killer looks into Corey's eyes, seems to see what he's been through, and then Corey changes. This is where he essentially turns evil, as though infected by Michael. Here's how I read that scene. This movie wants to explore what might turn someone evil. It posits that it could be a combination of internal factors, but also everyone around you. If everyone calls you a killer, treats you like one, and ostracizes you, it'll make you angry. That spark may lead to true evil. But to take a kid like Corey and turn him into an actual serial killer would take years. It doesn't happen overnight. But as a horror movie which skirts that supernatural line, it gets to use metaphor and make the point more expediently. So Michael Myers acts as a pressure cooker. He sees the spark that might lead to evil, he sees the potential, and brings it to fruition in a moment. It actually reminds me of The Shining. In that movie, Jack Torrance was already a bad man with the potential to do awful things. The Overlook Hotel didn't turn him evil. It just got him there quicker than he would on his own. Through supernatural horror, you can skip a few steps. I thought this choice worked, but the execution after Corey makes the turn is hit or miss. I hated the homeless guy giving the exposition of, "Normally Michael kills people. Why didn't he kill you?" The way Corey stands behind some bushes staring creepily is Spider-Man 3 symbiote levels of cheesy. Though when he gets angry and threatens Allison's ex-boyfriend, that rang a little more true. And he seemed like the kind of guy who would provoke Corey after the fact, so he made for a good first kill. I'm not counting the homeless guy, since that one was sort of self-defense. When Corey essentially fed the cop to Michael, I thought it was really creepy the way Michael starts to shake, almost like he's writhing in pleasure. And I think it's meant to imply that Michael and Corey's evil allows them to grow stronger by killing. I do wish it was a little clearer why Michael is decrepit now. He seemed totally fine at the end of Kills. But maybe the adrenaline wore off and his many wounds caught up with him. Then, with the townsfolk on high alert, Michael was forced to go into hiding and couldn't kill as frequently. So, he's become weak. The second half of the movie starts to lose me. Michael and Corey going on a serial killer rampage was all fine, solid slasher movie kills, especially the DJ where his tongue ends up on the turntable. But in my view, there were three things that went wrong. One, I was fine with Allison falling for Corey pretty fast. It's not unusual for someone to catch your eye and get excited about going out, but she seems to very quickly fall head over heels for him, to the point where she's ready to leave her grandmother to run away with him and even side with him against her. After Laurie's 40-year-old paranoia was proven true in 2018, I'd like to think she's earned a bit more credibility from her granddaughter, but I guess the bad boy wins out. Two, once they actually start discussing evil and talking about how they can see evil in each other's eyes, it all just comes off as really cheesy. The father of the boy Corey killed says he looked at Corey and could see in his eyes that he changed. When it comes to Michael, I go with it, because he's always had a supernatural aura around him, but when it's just humans looking at Corey, humans like us looking at the same eyes we're looking at, and they react like they're shaken to their core, it just comes off as kind of goofy. "He's down a dark path," the father says. "Did the town do this to him after the accident, or was it always there?" There's that lack of subtlety again, where the movie doesn't trust the audience, so it spells out the subtext. The scene with Laurie visiting Corey and pontificating on evil, I found similarly eye-roll inducing. Finally, one of the movie's biggest problems is that it's called Halloween Ends, meaning it carries the burden of showing the final battle between Laurie and Michael. even though that's not what the movie's about. It spends most of the time on the theme of what turns someone evil. Then, in the final act, it's forced by its place in the franchise to show you how to defeat evil. I'm honestly baffled by a lot of reviews I've read which say that the fight between Laurie and Michael is the only good part of the movie. It was a little nostalgic and emotional to see them fight one more time, intercut with footage from the original, plus callbacks, like this time he stabs her with a sewing needle. But at the same time, it felt disconnected from the rest of the movie, and it wasn't a horror movie at that point. It was an action movie, just two people fighting in a kitchen. And if the movie is interested in the nature of evil, there should be some thematic reason why Laurie could finally defeat Michael now after he was impervious for so many years. As it stands, the answer to how do you defeat evil seems to be, well, make sure you don't fight him until the final movie when they're allowed to die. I will admit, in the same way it was satisfying to finally see Laurie behead Michael in H2O, it was similarly satisfying to see her and Allison thoroughly destroy him here, and finally shred his body to unequivocally say he is dead. It's also nice to finally see a happy ending for Laurie. Not just her survival, but the implication that she's actually going to try and live a fulfilling life. And maybe she'll even find love. He's no Ben Tramer, but I think Frank Hawkins would make a fine companion to go see the cherry blossoms. Which I actually saw, by the way, a few years ago. They were okay, though I was more into the arcades at Akihabara. Anyway, I know Halloween Ends is hated by many. Personally, I appreciated what they were going for. I thought they mostly pulled it off in the first half, but just couldn't stick the landing and couldn't balance it with also closing out a franchise.
My sentiments toward Ends also apply to the sum of all three, in that I appreciate what they were going for. Although none of the three are perfect, and Kills is downright bad in my opinion, I do think it's clear they had a plan for the trilogy, at least on a thematic level. On a plot level, it doesn't really hold together because none of the characters have a clean through line for all three movies. Laurie, for example, feels sidelined in Kills and most of Ends. So her concluding battle with Michael, which should be the capper of the trilogy, instead feels tacked on. But thematically, they tried to have each movie look at evil from a different angle. This is far more admirable in my view than most of the other sequels, which instead focused on, how do we explain why Michael is still alive? What gimmick can we introduce to keep this fresh? And of course, there were the many examples of studio interference that turned the franchise from an artistic endeavor to a commoditized product. Ultimately, this new trilogy tried to be about something, and even if that fails, I will take that failure over a commercially successful but soulless movie any day. So although I was mixed on it overall, I definitely appreciated their aims and enjoyed the journey.
Whew. Well, that's all the Halloween movies. All right. I'm going to pop my white shirt back on and head upstairs to collect myself and figure out what to do about this whole Daniel situation.
What was the point in reviewing all these movies? I still don't get it. The source of my power? All I do is talk about movies. Without them, I'd have nothing. Wait a minute. That's it. It's the movies themselves. That's my power. Oh.
Sam Hain.
Sam Hain.
All right. You cured now?
I suddenly feel like killing is wrong. I killed my own brother. I committed fratricide. Fratricide!
Relax. Stop saying fratricide. Just calm down. What about you, Owen? Are you cured?
Yeah, totally.
Wouldn't hurt a fly.
Okay, good. Now, I have a little business to attend to.
Have you figured it out yet?
Figuring out what?
Who I really am.
No.
Think about it. I cursed Daniel. I knew it would get you to watch and review all those movies. Who would want that?
I don't know. I mean, these movies have all been reviewed thousands of times. Who would want that? Damn. I wish I thought about that before spending all that time making this video.
For thousands of years we've been telling stories, whether it's by the campfire, on a stage, in the movies. After all that time, every story has already been told.
What are you saying?
There is no originality left. All that remains is to talk about other people's stories.
Talk about other people's stories? You mean reviews?
Yes, reviews, but also recaps, analysis, endings explained, rankings, regurgitate, recycle.
But what if I don't want to do that?
You have no choice. You carry the mark now.
This thorn tattoo?
That's not a thorn, it's an A.
What do you mean? What does A stand for?
Think about it. You're a content creator, and I am...
It's Al, the guy who sold you the tapes.
Oh yeah, thank you.
Remember, the algorithm could be listening. Algorithm? You're the algorithm?
That's right. And you're cursed. Cursed to eternal life. Creating content.
Actually, that sounds pretty good.
Goodbye, for now.
Okay. That was kind of weird. Oh well. I wonder what I should review next.
He knows I like acting. I did a great job in the Lyle thing. And who do I get to play? Michael freaking Myers, the guy who's in 13 movies, doesn't even say a word. Except that one time. He had to write a pointless shiny ripoff in the middle of the video just to give me a few lines. Well, I'll show him. I just gotta figure out how to get my revenge. Yeah, that'll do. Well, Gil, perhaps it's time for you.